order. Please rise for Mayor Michael Fougere.
Please be seated, everyone, and good evening. Welcome to the October 28th meeting of City Council. Before we get to the agenda, we have three presentations, a bit of a deviation from our usual order of work. We have three presentations. The first one is an award the city has received for the underutilized land study. So on behalf of City Council, I'd like to congratulate our staff on winning this really prestigious award. The City of Regina's Planning and Development Services Department has won the Excellence in Planning Award for the underutilized land study. This award was presented by the Saskatchewan Professional Planners Institute, and the study looks at the important area of potential growth in our city. It explores the challenges that come with attempting to redevelop and build new structures in existing neighborhoods. And it outlines potential actions the city can take to improve viability. It gives us some important perspective on constraints and opportunities of underutilized lands, as well as initiating a conversation towards innovative solutions and encourage infill development. We know that our OCP's plan for growth for our city to 300,000 people will require innovative infill projects. This study presents a strong base from which to build a conversation around how we move forward in that effort. My council colleagues and I want to express our thanks to those who made this project come to life. Charlie Tolman, Linda Huynh, Shane Lugner, Deborah Bryden, Greg Coons, and Diana Harlech. We're very proud of the work they've done to date in this regard, and let's give them a great round of applause for what they've done. So Ms. Harlech, if you could come forward to receive the award, please. The next presentation I'd like to do relates to some work our city did with the City of Winnipeg. It's my pleasure to recognize the City of Regina staff who went above and beyond helping our neighbors. Just before Thanksgiving, a storm hit Manitoba that brought unprecedented damage to transmission lines, towers, and trees. In Winnipeg, approximately 10 to 15% of the city's tree canopy were damaged or destroyed. Urgent work was required to clean up the nearly 30,000 trees to ensure public safety, fully restore power throughout Winnipeg and nearby communities. And when a state of emergency was declared, the City of Regina answered that call. We sent an experienced team with specialized equipment to help clean up in the cleanup effort. They worked from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. cleaning up the average of about one city block per hour. In fact, I understand that one day alone our crews cleaned up 13,000 tons of fallen or damaged trees. And that's remarkable work. Some of these people are here tonight and some could not make it. But I know City Council would like to recognize the following staff who were on the ground in Winnipeg. Corey Doka, Barry Erickson, Laird Williamson, Kevin Merring, Brandy McLeod, Dakota Van Hoof, Kyle Gibson, and Justin Paulo. We want to thank you for taking time away from your family and your friends to travel to Winnipeg and applaud you in your efforts that you did. Several city departments are also involved in coordinating this effort. They include the Emergency Management and Fire Protective Services, Parks, Recreation and Culture, People and Organizational Culture, and Citizen Experience. I also want to thank our administration leaders for the work they did as well, and that's Jeff Rowden, Chief Lane Jackson, Michelle Wall, Lori Shaley, Russell Irick, Marco Deanna, and Jill Swenson. Again, thank you for your efforts, and let's give them a good round of applause for what they've done. Stand up. Ask them to stand up, please. So I had many calls from the mayor of Winnipeg and other people in Winnipeg that were expressed their gratitude for the work that you did. So thank you so very, very much for that. Our last presentation is the Municipal Heritage Award, and it's a great pleasure to be able to present the award for rehabilitation this evening. It goes to a truly remarkable project that combines both a presentation of an iconic heritage building exterior with a significant renovation and expansion of the building's walls and roof. The H&M storefront project is an ambitious renovation for the former CIBC building at the south entrance of the Cornwall Centre Mall. That's more than a fresh coat of paint. A lot of work was done there. Since the building was separate from the Cornwall Centre entrance, a lot of work went into fully incorporating the two buildings, making a seamless transition to the rest of the mall. And this meant removing interior construction of the building and roof while bracing the exterior walls. Incorporation of new floors constructed at different elevations to make the main floor fully accessible and match adjacent mall retail space. Literally raising the roof to coordinate the elevations of the two new floors. That's in addition to all the other exterior work that was being done. It was all done while preserving the priceless heritage exterior of the building. And this is truly a remarkable project. And if you haven't seen it yet, I would encourage you to go take a look at that building. I want to recognize Cushman Wakefield Assets, Inc., Philip Goldman Architecture, PCL Construction Management, Inc., and Brixton Masonry, Inc., for the work they did on this project. And I'd ask that Chris Brown of MMC International Architects step forward to accept this award. Maybe we can have a picture of the forestry system out here. I have a picture. Chess game, isn't it? So, I'll see you beside.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I'll begin with the confirmation of the agenda with the, okay. Councilor Bryce,
I'll move the agenda with the changes from the clerk's office, the addition and the move.
seconder, please. Councilor Bresciani, all those in favor? Opposed, that's carried. And the minutes from the last meeting of September 30th, 2019, a motion for that, please. Councilor Hawkins, seconder, please. Councilor Frondera, any discussion, errors or omissions? All those in favor? Opposed, carried. Move on to delegation and advertised and public notice bylaws and related reports. Mr. Absam, please come up. Welcome to City Council. If you could step forward, identify yourself, who you represent. You have 5 minutes for your presentation. Members of council may have questions afterwards.
Dear Mayor Fujer and the City Council, my name is Vakar Hassan and I am the applicant for that facility at the garage we have to convert into contract zoning. We use that facility just to get together there and pray, and we have a restriction. We just get together only 20 people there, and most of the people, seniors and kids, walk to that facility and then they leave and disperse. So we are requesting the City Council to approve this report, and I would like to thank the City Administration for putting together this report and request City Council to approve as it is presented. And I'm here to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you very much for your presentation. Other questions of the delegation? Oh, there are none. Thank you very much. You can return to the gallery. Thank you so much. Councilor Young, you want to introduce the report for us?
Thank you, Your Worship. I bring forward CR 1990. The Regina Planning Commission recommended rezoning 2 Shepherd Street from R1 residential detached zone to a contract zone agreement. Contract zones allow for unique proposals that were not considered in the current regulations, and they're applied at council's discretion if some guidelines are met. In this case, this conforms to the OCP. It represents a unique and positive development opportunity, and it's compatible with existing adjacent homes and development. This contract zone allows a maximum of 25 persons at one time on the property. The area is a detached garage located within a residential property that will be used as a religious institution for communal prayer service. This is similar to the contract zone that Council approved on Assiniboia Avenue last year. This property is being used now informally for communal prayer. So parking, of course, was one of the questions that Planning Commission always asks. And parking isn't seen as an issue since most of the users of the property live within walking distance. And if you look at the map, the site is on a corner lot with vacant lot across the street, and few, if any, properties will be affected by parking on the street. This site also allows for 3 vehicles on the parking plat. Planning Commission recommends concurrence.
Very seconder for the motion, please. Councilor Bresciani, discussion on the report? Pretty straightforward. All those in favor? Did you, oh, I didn't see your light on. Okay. Councilor Murray.
Working through the nuts and bolts of how this works, do we, because it's a religious institution, does this fall under no taxation like other religious institutions, or is this strictly on the planning side?
Ms. Harlock?
Through you, Your Worship, it is. This is just a planning application at this time. When assessment and taxation goes out and sees the application, they'll do their assessment.
Just wondering when that happens. Okay, great.
It's as soon as, if there is an approval, they get notification.
Okay, and then that's when that's
That would
discussed
trigger them
Great.
to
Thank you.
move forward. Thanks.
Now I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Councilor Young for discretionary use application at 4401 Dewey Avenue.
Yes, Your Worship. This is a proposed addition to the Circle Project existing daycare center. It's been there for many years, and there are 36 children served in this daycare. The land use for this does not change. It's a zoning change. They're adding, would like to add a new addition to provide ground level accessibility. Right now they don't have accessibility. to the building, and it will also provide a room for an office and meeting space in support of the daycare. There's no change to the number of children receiving daycare. So there are two recommendations that I'll briefly talk about. Number one, removes the current contract zone for this property. A contract zone doesn't allow for an addition to the building, so that's why it has to be changed. Recommendation 2 approves the property zone change to R2 residential semi-detached, where child care centers are a discretionary use, which is why it's coming to council this evening. So the land use doesn't change, it's just a zoning change. Planning Commission approved, we're happy to approve this recommendation and ask council for concurrence.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Could I have a seconder for the motion, please? Councillor O'Donnell. Any discussion on the report? Councillor O'Donnell.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just want to thank Planning Commission for this. This is a daycare that happens to reside in the area where I look after, and I have dealt with all of the neighbors around here on other issues, never once on the daycare. This is a win for the neighborhood. This is a win for daycare, and I think very astute for them to have to look at a change and stay in the neighborhood. So we're thrilled to have them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Donnell. Any further discussion? Closed debate, Councillor Young? Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? Carry. We have two bylaws now. Councillor Stevens.
I moved, seconded by Councillor Hawkins, that bylaws 2019-52 and -53 be introduced and read a first time.
Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. Council will now consider the following bylaws requiring a public hearing. 219-52 respecting rezoning to allow for the development of a religious institute at 2 Shepherd Street, and 2019-53 respecting rezoning to accommodate an addition to an existing child care center located at 4401 Dewdney Avenue. If there's anyone in the gallery who wishes to address council on either of these, I would ask you to indicate your interest at this time. There is no one, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. I'll call the vote on first reading. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Councillor Stevens.
I move, seconded by Councillor Findura, that bylaws 2019-52 and 53 be read a second time.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried.
I move, seconded by Councillor Bresciani, that council hereby consent to bylaws 2019-52 and 53 going to third reading at this meeting.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously.
I move, seconded by Councillor Flagel, that bylaws 2019-52 and 53 be read a third time.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Move on to delegation and related reports and motions. First, we have Judith Verzak is not going to be here, so I'll ask that we have received and file on her submission, DE 19-48. Councillor Murray, and seconded by Councillor Hawkins. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Now the downtown public washrooms report. Councillor Stevens.
Great, thank you. So we discussed this issue at CPS earlier this month, and ultimately it's about where do you go pee in the park. Actually quite important. Incidentally, CBC did some coverage on CBC Ideas in an episode titled Dignity Down the Toilet, Public Bathrooms as a Human Right. And in fact, if you look at the report, it does discuss the importance not only for downtown revitalization, accessibility, but also that we have a population, a very mixed population that needs to use the washroom for various reasons. The report also highlights costs, implications, maintenance. It also provides us with a temporary solution to a long-term problem, so I think this is a good step forward. I would ask administration to highlight the key messages in this report and what it's ultimately asking for.
Would you like just get a seconder for the report, please? Councillor Flagel. Ms. Harlock.
Through you, Your Worship. So as Councillor Stevens had indicated, this is a report that came out of a motion from Council. We've been exploring the topic by surveying other municipalities in Western Canada, and we engaged in discussions with the Downtown Business Improvement District. Our report provides a summary of the research that we've done and options for next steps. What we have learned and what we're recommending is that a pilot project be done in 2020, or pardon me, in 2020 with budget monies going into the 2020 budget process to look at a temporary washroom facility that would be put down into the city square so that administration could further assess the implications before investing in the full design of a permanent facility. At the Community Protective Services, there was lots of discussions about what are the needs, who's going to be using it, those sorts of things. So as Ms. Vericek said in her letter, they're willing to partner with us to come forward and look at going to the washrooms to check for cleanliness on a more regular basis, et cetera. I think by moving forward in the pilot project, we'll be able to ascertain all of the different information that we need to be able to make a more informed decision going forward with anything that council may want to look at from a permanent perspective. When we would install the bathrooms, we would put different metrics in to measure usage, all of those sorts of things, so that we can provide that data to council after the pilot project. We'd be happy to answer any questions that council might have.
Thank you. In the report, it talks about a trailer type thing. Are we talking like porta potties? Like, I don't know the exact terms, but those sorts of portable washrooms, or what exactly are we talking about here? Through you, Your
Ms.
Worship.
Harlock?
Through Your Worship, these are self-contained units that are not the blue stalls that you would typically see. They're more higher end building or units that we would be using.
Okay, thank you. What about hand washing facilities with the washroom part? Because being a nurse, that's important to me, so I just want to make sure that we have the appropriate hand washing and sanitary things available.
Yeah.
Ms. Harlock?
Through Your Worship, yes, all of the units would have hand washing or sanitizing chemicals within the use for patrons.
Okay, thank you. So if we're I know some people who will not use portable bathrooms. So how do we get a full concept with a pilot project using temporary washroom facilities? Are we making an allowance for that? So there's lots of people who don't use those type of facilities, though they'd rather go to the library and use the library one with a flush toilet. So are we making allowance through that, through the pilot project, through Your Worship?
Ms. Harlock?
Through Your Worship, that's definitely something that we can take into consideration as we're moving forward with respect to monitoring what we're seeing in the usage of the library and those sorts of things. I may ask Mr. Sale if he has anything else to add with respect to how we'll evaluate the project at the end.
Through the chair, we're going to look at monitoring how much water is used in the facilities, how often the doors are open. We'll be partnering with the bid to look at the facility once every hour most days, so we'll be able to record how often it needs to be cleaned, how often it needs to be restocked, and this will inform our future design decisions.
Okay. I don't know if that totally answers my question, but I think through Your Worship, I think the director has something else to add.
Ms. Harlock?
Your Worship, so as I indicated, we will definitely looking at how do we capture perhaps those percentages that might not use those because of the type of facility it is, but we're hoping because of the facility that we're putting, or that we're recommending putting in, it isn't like your typical
Porta potty.
blue porta potty. It's a different type of facility that we hope that more patrons will be more comfortable using. But we'll definitely work with the library, who has been our partner in the downtown right now, providing facilities, washroom facilities for residents and visitors.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bryce. Councilor Bresciani?
Thank you, Your Worship. As Councillor Stevens said, this was discussed at committee. One of the questions that was asked was how many times will this be checked by the city staff, and then for cleaning, and then on a regular basis?
Ms. Harlock?
Through the chair.
Through Your Worship, so the city was going to look at it, I believe it was 4 times a day, or pardon me, 2 times a day. And now we have commitment from the RD bid to look into it more often, to check in on the facility.
So I think that was kind of part of the discussion we were kind of pulled with. Was there enough cleaning? Because I think we know that residents want the toilets or the but they want them to be clean. So is there, just that it's in kind, how will that work with cost then? How does that work with Regina Downtown bid?
Ms. Harlock?
Through the chair.
Through your worship, I might ask Mr. Sale to go through or Ms. Shaley to go through the proposal that the downtown bid had put forward and how the costs will come into play.
Ms. Shaley?
Through you, your worship. So we will have an agreement with the service provider to clean the facility twice a day. The bid will be checking every hour, at least every hour, and then they'll contact us if there's additional levels of service required. The bid is not charging us for that service. They'll be on site at the new pavilion, and so they will be able to do that as part of their regular business. If the bid contacts us and informs us that there's an issue and there needs to be additional cleaning, then we'll be able to contact the service provider to undertake that work.
Okay, great, good. So what are the hours that we're looking at? Was it still 6 in the morning through the chair? Or were we looking at, is that something that's going to be looked at? I think when we last talked in committee it was 6 in the morning, but I'm not sure if that was what other cities were doing or?
Ms. Harlock?
Your worship, yes, we would be open from 6 until, till 11.
6 to 11. And then, so I guess the question is, why would it be 6? Why do we need to be open that early? And was there any municipalities that kind of learned that maybe with no one around, is that kind of when we know that some things that happen in these washrooms maybe would be, I think the hours that Regina Downtown Bid is doing is 9 o'clock.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just wondering, even an 8 o'clock window, is that something that could be considered? Chair?
Ms. Harlock?
Through your worship, we could definitely look at different hours, but I might ask Ms. Shaley to go through the rationale from the 6 to 11. Thank you.
Ms. Shaley?
Through you, your worship, we really established the hours based on the park hours, so it's basically dawn till dusk. Part of the purpose of the pilot project is to enable us to collect enough information so that when we move into constructing a permanent facility, we'll know what the appropriate hours are. And so based on our park hours and what we know from other municipalities, we feel that this is an appropriate span to consider for our pilot project.
Okay, great. So then it'll be up to our city staff to come and open the doors at 6 and then close them.
Ms. Harlock?
Okay,
Through your worship, that is correct.
good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bashani. Councilor O'Donnell?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I was not part of committee, and so perhaps this was pursued, and I'm just looking at the long-term solution. So I'm aware that there's a Canadian-made, self-contained washroom unit. It has concrete basin, concrete toilet. It flushes every 15 minutes the whole inside of the unit so that it is always clean. One, question, is staff aware of that? And two, is that a part of a consideration in terms of long-term evaluation, please?
Ms. Harlock?
Your worship, it was considered. We did look at it and noted that we did, we do know about those self-cleaning toilets. And as we move forward, that would be something as we move forward in the design that we may take into consideration moving forward.
And if I could, because reference is made in the report to dollars, was this one of the ones that was on the high end or not?
Ms. Harlock?
Through your worship, I believe it was one of the more higher-end options.
Thanks for that. That's all I
Councilor
need.
O'Donnell? You just want to be there when the 15 minutes arrives. You want to be out of there, so. Councilor Flagel?
Flashing light, get out. Yeah, so, thanks. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things we talked about at CPS. And it had to do with the different cities that have tested, have these types of places, and there's illicit activity going on, drugs, everything, because it is more of a contained unit and not a one singular stall. After talking on CPS, I had somebody call me that's within the industry and said, do not put the trailers there, go with standalone porta potties, strap 4 of them together, because it's not a hangout. It does the exact same thing that you want it to do. If you want to go to the washroom, It's available to go to the washroom. It does not become a hangout when it's a porta potty, whether there's 4 of them strapped together. So part of my problem, even if this is a test, is the fact that if we're putting something there, and I like the Councillor O'Donnell way, if we're going to go, let's go big and do it properly. And if we got to flush these people out and flush it down every 15 minutes, so be it. But if we go with this trailer, and I know what these trailers are like because I've seen them in Craven, and Craven, as good as it is, they are a mess in about 4 hours. And I'm sorry, but it makes it more difficult because there's more illicit activity going on in probably the downtown area today, as Councillor Stevens mentioned, that we don't need them to have a place to go and hide inside. The biggest thing with these is that if we create an atmosphere where they can hang out, they will. Whereas if somebody just needs to go to the washroom real quick, a porta potty will do the job. We do it at events, Folk Festival, all the different festivals that are in the park. We put a porta potty bank of them along the thing, and the company comes and cleans them out and flushes them and washes them. So I know that we talked about it at CPS, but has there been any other discussion about going away from the trailer to standalone porta potties and just go do it that way?
Ms. Hawryluk?
Committee asked that we undertake looking at what 6 porta potties would look like, 3 at the east side, 3 on the west side. So what we looked at was service twice a day, 7 days a week, would be a cost of $37,000, just over $37,000 for a 4-month pilot.
And the trailer would cost us, for the same timeline, 20?
It would be 20, and it would be 5 months.
And that's one trailer or 2?
I believe it's the one, just the one trailer, yeah.
On one?
Accessible trailer, yeah.
Okay, so to that point, I think what we're doing is if we're putting 3 on one side and 3 on the other, but then we're taking a trailer and only doing 1, then this really isn't a fair comparison, because I know those trailers and there's only 3 or 4 people in them at one time. That's all you can get in them. So we should actually be looking at putting 2 trailers for 40 grand, or going to the porta potties that are possibly quite a bit safer for anybody that happens to walk in on something that wouldn't happen when it's a porta potty, because it's a single unit. Whereas if you have 3 or 4 people collecting in a place, doing whatever they're doing, and you have a mother and a child walk into this environment and they see that, well, they're not going to go to the washroom anyway, so they're going to go over to the library, so we may as well not even have it. So there is that to it. Did we look at putting 2 on the plaza for this particular project, or just didn't do it because of cost?
Ms. Hawryluk?
Through your worship, at this point, we just looked at putting the 1. Definitely, it's something that if council wishes to put more than 1, it would just be a matter of finding a location. I'm not sure if you have anything else to add? No.
Thanks. Real quick, where would we put the second bank of porta potties then, if we can't find a location for a second trailer?
Ms. Hawryluk?
Through your worship, we would find the locations.
Okay.
If it depends on what council's direction is,
Okay.
we would work with the downtown bid to put them where they would be
Okay.
best served.
Do I serve now for an amendment?
There's other speakers.
Okay,
I'll speak.
I
I'll
think
give
I
the
would like
floor
to
back.
bring an amendment
I'll give
to
the floor
split
back.
and go to 2 porta potty setups when
Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. 2 questions. I appreciate the way the briefing report is set out, and I appreciate the options. The option chosen is for a pilot project. My question is this: are there other communities that have conducted similar pilot projects, and what are the results? That's the first thing. And then the second question, Your Worship, would be, if it comes time, if the conclusion is that the pilot project doesn't warrant going ahead with washrooms, this kind of public washroom, how do you propose to sell that to the public? Because often when you start something, it's very difficult to say, no, we're discontinuing it. 2 questions, Your Worship.
Ms. Hawryluk?
So with the pilot project, currently we still have the agreements with the RPL for washroom facilities in the downtown, and we'd obviously just have to work with, again, increasing awareness of that should the pilot not proceed. In the past, definitely other municipalities have gone through this, and I might ask Ms. Shaley or Ms. Shaley to talk about the experiences that we heard from the other municipalities.
Ms. Shaley?
Through you, Your Worship, we're not aware of other municipalities that have done this as a pilot project. Our recommendation is based on the fact that other municipalities have invested without doing a pilot project and then realized the experience was such that their operational costs, for example, were much higher than they anticipated, and so that now they're changing their plans. I'll maybe ask Mr. Sale to elaborate. But this is based on the experience of other municipalities who have actually constructed facilities.
Mr. Sale?
Yeah, through the chair, Edmonton specifically rolled out a bunch of portable options and then had to dial them back when they found that they were having issues with maintenance. And highlighted in the report also is the experience of Lethbridge. They rolled out a permanent single stall self-cleaning washroom, and that was about 3 years ago, and they have closed that facility and they're removing it, and they've built new monitored washrooms in a transit station in their downtown.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Hawkins, other speakers? Councillor, sorry. Councillor Massanelli.
Thank you. Through the chair, I noticed from the report of committee to now, there's a slight change. There was a little bit cited in the committee report about security. Is RD Bid's proposal to check in on the washrooms over and above security, or is that displacing it?
Charlotte?
Through you, Your Worship, the report is the same with respect to all of the costs. What the RD bid is stating is that they are just giving in-kind values with respect to the work that they'll be doing. Did I get your question right?
I think so.
Yeah.
So there's still security coming by hourly to make sure that it's checked on and things are proper. And
Yeah, through you, Your Worship. So yes, the RD bid staff will come by because their pavilion that they'll be manning is nearby, and they'll just go in and do checks. And then, as Ms. Shaley said, if there is a need for an additional cleaning or some reason that the city would need to be involved, they would call us. They wouldn't be doing the work themselves.
in reading through the report, it looks very descriptive that there's problems with these washrooms throughout Canada. I'm wondering what kind of information you guys are trying to take out of this. Is it just the amount of use, if it's really needed or not, or maintenance costs? What are you looking for out of this trial period?
Ms. Harlock?
Through you, Your Worship. So there's a number of things, wanting to understand the type of usage that we're getting during events, those sorts of things. It's important to know the users. Is it one of the questions that came up at Community Protective Services and that the bid brought up is what's the groups that you're looking to serve? Is it visitors like outside of the city? Is it homelessness? Who is it that the groups that you want to serve, because that might change the design aspects of the facility. So we want to try and garner as much information so that if it is a decision to move forward with a permanent facility, that we have all of that data so that we can give council different design options.
Okay, thank you. I was really thinking of not supporting this because I thought there was enough information here, but changed my mind.
Thank you, Councillor Massanelli. If there are no other speakers, I'll give the floor back to Councillor Flega for your amendment.
Thank you. The amendment would be, Ms. Ackerman, that we look at a less, what's the right word to use? We look at a lesser option to go to a 2 or a 3 bank system of porta potties and have one on each side of on 2 locations at the Victoria Park. And because if we're only going with 1 today, I would rather see us have 2 and split it up, and we can probably do the costing based on the same costing. So I think if we go to a bank of 2 or a bank of 3, and what would the cost be, and times 2.
Councilor Flanagan, just to be clear, what is your amendment? Is it to have porta potties put in or double the current design?
Porta potties,
So you want okay, let's make sure we write this down properly.
yeah, as opposed to a house trailer.
Porta potties in there, I think.
Try to give it some,
So that's what you're looking for.
Bank of 2 or 3 porta potties be tested for 1 season in pilot project downtown at 2 different locations.
Sure.
Have a seconder for that, please?
Thanks.
Councilor Bershani seconds that. Okay, debate on the amendment.
That's not going to go.
Okay, just a second here. Councilor Murray,
Thank you, through your worship.
3 minutes on an amendment, eh?
On the amendment, I wasn't in CPS, but my understanding was that the porta potties were actually more expensive than what the trailer options were. So it was looked at. Is that correct?
Ms. Howard?
So what we provided council in a memo was that the question was is if we had 6 porta potties. And so what we got quoted was for 4 regular units and 2 accessible units for 4 months, 7 days a week, 2 cleanings a day would be $37,036. That would include delivery and removal that we would require as part of the quote.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Murray. Councilor Stevens on the amendment.
Thank you. Through the chair, I appreciate Councillor Flagel's intention, but I can't support it for a couple of reasons. One, it's ugly. So I can stomach the porta potties during the big events. I get it. There's a lot of people going through here. The alternative that administration has put before us isn't the most aesthetically pleasing, but the bid has offered to put a bit of lipstick on that pig. And with a wrap, there's an effort to actually make it fit into the aesthetics of the downtown. This would be dreadful, honestly. And if this is our permanent solution, I think we're going in the wrong direction. If this is a stopgap before we build a permanent public washroom, that's fine. The second reason is I worry that we're making a decision about public washrooms based on a fear of who might be using them. I don't want to push that conversation further because I know where it goes. There are costs, but ultimately public washrooms are about going to the bathroom in some semblance of dignity, and we can't be fearful of what's going on in those washrooms for various reasons. One is that those activities are taking place in the downtown. Frankly, if we're talking about people shooting up, using drugs, that's a conversation about harm reduction, not about not having washrooms. So I understand the spirit here in having the porta potties, but I do believe that even, at least in the short term, the solution that administration has mapped out for us is the best, and I'm hoping that the feedback will then put us in a position to either say, 1, we're going to keep going with this, or 2, we're going to build a permanent facility. Again, this is about dignity, accessibility, and the attractiveness of the downtown. So for that reason, I won't be supporting the porta potty option.
Thank you, Councilor Stevens. Councilor Fundura.
thank you, Worship. Through you, I think we already know what the porta potties do. We already have a lot of information for all the events that are happening there. So we know what the porta potties can do. So my thing is, like, what are we trying to achieve? I mean, administration is bringing something more concrete that we could put a little bit of a debate to it, or get a clear answer. We know from other jurisdiction, but I think we need to look at each jurisdiction being different. So we need to look at as a Regina solution, and so I don't think I won't support the porta potties.
Thank you, Councilor Fundura. Councilor Bershani.
Worship. So we asked administration to go back and bring us some options. And one of the ones that we asked for was not a porta potty because we already have them in the park. Our Regina Downtown bid, when they have events, they have them there for their events. But the other piece that I think that we offer events across the city, But downtown, we're asking people to come downtown when we're hosting winter events, summer events, the farmers market. We want to entice people to come downtown. The summer cinema, young children, and when we don't have a washroom facility, and the library has been so wonderful that, yes, we have a contract, but there's extra security, and there's all that. I think it's time to look after our own responsibility, and look at the options. I think if we go to a porta potty, there's going to be people that just won't use a porta potty. They just won't. Mom and children, they won't. They'll go to the library. So I think I'd like to remain with this to start. And then maybe by then it's a conversation with the library down the way if they do a renovation or a build. That's the next conversation of what it would look like. But I think this will give us enough data to collect the data, at least as a not, I'm going to say a real washroom, but something that's better than a porta potty. So I can't support that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barshani. Other speakers to the amendment? Councillor O'Donnell, will you take the chair for a moment, please?
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I just rise to say I'm going to concur with the recommendation and not support the amendment. Most of the reasons have been set out as to why, primarily the aesthetics of it and likely the usage of it would be a concern, having porta potties there. The design, as I understand it, is more substantial, and I would go with that as a good test for this. But the main point I want to make is that I'm hoping we will engage RD Bid in a more substantive way. There's discussion of another building being put on the plaza. We talked about that last time we built the last building. We said, why were not washrooms put in that building? So we're pushing to have a second building built. Maybe washrooms should go in there too on a permanent basis sooner rather than later. Thank you. Councillor Flanagan, do you want to close debate? Okay.
Thanks. I can't support the amendment with the porta potties. Cleanliness is a concern. The usage is a concern for me. And I just don't think it would give us a true pilot project of people actually using a washroom in the park. So I can't support the amendment. I think that the original motion for the trial of the trailers is appropriate. I can't support the porta potty motion.
Thank you, Councillor Bryce. Councillor Flanagan, you want to close debate?
I just wanted to, just so you know, I wanted to throw this out there because the discussion was at CPS as well about porta potties and what they would do, and I wanted to make sure that we all had a good understanding that these trailers are good in a lot of ways, but, and I'll leave that at that because in the report it says in every city the issues that Councillor Stephen was starting to refer to. And I mean, maybe at some point we'll go to what Councillor O'Donnell talked about and flush every 15 minutes and keep everybody in and out of, in or out of it. So I think what we need to do is move forward, and if this trailer is the way to go, then that's the way to go. But if the porta potties are just as effective and cost-wise, because now you've got two locations instead of one. So I would still like to see what we do. This is trial, and we'll then go from there. But I know a washroom's going to cost us, what, $750, I think is what it was? $750,000 at some point?
Roughly.
Somewhere? Okay, anyway, thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Flanagan. You've closed debate on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? Defeated unanimously. I just want to say that, just for the record. Okay. Just want to say that. Just say what you want, Councillor Flanagan. Thank you very much. Okay. On the main report, any further discussion on that? Councillor Hawkins, did you speak on the, you spoke on the main one. You spoke on the main one before the amendment came in. I have you listed as spoken. I do.
I asked a question.
Well, that's your within your one-time speak on a motion. I'm sorry. No other speakers? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously. We'll move on to our next delegation, Brandon Wright, Bike Regina. Mr. Wright, if you could identify yourself, who you represent, you have 5 minutes for your presentation, and there may be questions afterwards.
Sure. Good evening. My name is Brandon Wright. I'm a board member with Bike Regina. Bike Regina is a nonprofit cycling advocacy group. I'm going to start by reading the motion, because that hasn't been done yet. It reads, whereas safe modes of transportation is a priority of the OCP, including multimodal forms of transport, including cycling. Safe modes of transportation is priority, sorry. Be it resolved, when passing a cyclist over 60 kilometers an hour, a distance of 1.5 meters must be maintained. When passing a cyclist under 60 kilometers an hour, a distance of 1 meter must be maintained. A fine structure be designed, implemented, and enforced. A bylaw will be put before council during Q1 of 2020. I'm going to talk about the 60 kilometers an hour a little bit further down in my presentation. So at Bike Regina, we represent the voice of a large number of avid cyclists, including commuters who use Regina City streets every day to get to where they're going, be it work, school, running errands, or leisure. We've heard from our membership, and the message is clear. Motorist behavior makes cyclists feel unsafe on the streets. For some, this is no more than an annoyance. For others, it keeps them off the streets, and as a result, off their bikes. People who feel unsafe biking simply revert back to other modes, typically driving, which increases the number of cars on the streets while reducing Regina's active transportation numbers. The Provincial Safety Act defines the bicycle as a vehicle. It states that drivers must pass other vehicles only when it is safe to do so. It does not define what a safe passing distance is. This bylaw would provide a tool for law enforcement to enforce safe passing. Other Canadian provinces and cities have implemented this same law. Nova Scotia in 2011, Ontario in 2015, Quebec in 2018, and most recently Calgary in September of this year. It is also currently being drafted into Saskatoon's cycling bylaws. Now with that, getting back to the 60 kilometers per hour, in my research, Quebec uses a 50 kilometers an hour threshold between the two distances, 1 meter and 1.5 meters. I think 50 kilometers per hour works better with the speed limits that we have on most of our residential streets, and I think we should discuss changing that to 50 kilometers an hour. It is important to note and remember that cyclists have the right to use the full lane. Bike Regina strongly encourages cyclists to ride in the middle of the lane to be more visible to motorists, but not everyone has the confidence or experience in traffic to feel comfortable in the middle of the lane. The safe passing bylaw would allow them to ride closer to the parking lane or shoulder more safely if they choose to do so. A bit more on that, SGI teaches this technique to motorcycle riders. It's called the blocking position. It discourages drivers from trying to squeeze past in the same lane. Now, SGI may not want to admit this, but the same logic applies to cyclists. Having something on paper, this 1 meter buffer should help a little bit. All road users have responsibilities. With cyclists being the more vulnerable road user, it is important to try to protect them from fear, injury, or fatality with bylaws such as this. It can be very startling and scary when as a cyclist, when a motor vehicle is suddenly directly beside you and any small error from either party could result in a collision. Also, as a cyclist, it's kind of hard to maintain your line when there are obstacles such as potholes, or on days like today, snow drifts and clumps of snow on ice. So in closing, we ask that all voters thoughtfully consider traffic safety and the growing number of cyclists when voting on this bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Wright. I'll see if there's questions. There are. We'll start with Councillor Young.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for coming forward, Brandon. I think this is critical because we have more and more people in bikes on the street, so safety is critical. In your reading and talking to other people about this, how is that enforced? Do you take the license number of the car and turn it in, or do you have to have an enforcement person present?
Right. Enforcement, I think, will be tricky. One thing I found in Hamilton, the police, when they're on patrol, on cycle or on bike, they have a device. It would be sonar or laser distance measurement, and they can measure the distance between them as an officer and the motor vehicle passing them, then flag them down the road and give them a warning or issue a ticket at that time. Outside of that, I think we would rely on officers' judgment if they see this happening as it happens. Beyond all that, I think the biggest thing here is driver education. It'll just remind drivers that, yes, the cyclist has the right to be there, and, you know, they are the more vulnerable road users, so, you know, please leave a little more space when passing. Some cyclists also do use cameras, if that would help. A camera doesn't really determine distance either, but maybe if there were actually a collision. There's been a few reports of recent collisions with truck mirrors. Trucks, large vehicles, don't really fit that well in a lane with a bike, and some of them have quite large mirrors, and they're usually right at kind of head height.
Yeah.
So if that were caught on camera, maybe the police could act on that in some way.
Okay. Do you have any ideas for driver education that we could use?
That's tricky. I'm not sure what the city could do to roll out more information on that. We try to contact SGI regularly to get them to do more of a safety campaign for cyclists. Their customer base is obviously motorists, and whenever they talk about cycling, they get a bunch of motorists giving them flack. So that would be another avenue that we'll continue to pursue.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Wright, I appreciate your comments, and I appreciate the emphasis that you put on the safety of cyclists and the feeling of vulnerability that cyclists feel. I'm wondering if there are any other things that you think either motorists or cyclists could be doing to decrease the feeling of vulnerability that cyclists must feel to increase their feeling of safety.
Thank you for your question. Yeah, I think there it's all about just sharing the road and you know, giving ample space when passing. As I mentioned, both cyclists and motorists have responsibilities, so cyclists need more education as well and adhering to the route or the rules of the road. Yeah, more courtesy on the roads would be good, and that comes through education. I think if we get to a point where cyclists and motor vehicles just can no longer interact because our ridership is growing and continues to grow, if that reaches a critical point where motorists feel that cyclists just can't be on the road anymore, then we're going to need to ramp up our infrastructure efforts.
One further question, if I might, Your Worship. What about bike helmets? What about the use of, requiring the use of bike helmets for cyclists as a safety measure to protect them?
For sure. Thank you for that question. I prepared an answer. Bike Regina would like to see this council continue to remove barriers to cycling, not add them, thereby growing the cycling numbers and enhancing the overall health of the community. We certainly do not want to penalize people for making a personal choice. We understand the severity of head injuries, and Bike Regina will always encourage people to wear helmets.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Councillor O'Donnell.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for being here. I find some comfort in your last answer too as well, by the way. So I've moved on in life, and I now have an e-bike. And although I have friends who have tested it and found it goes very fast, I'm not at that point in my life yet, just so you know. So, but I'm asking how this is going to change in the next while. If more people, which the dealers tell me are buying e-bikes versus a regular bike, and no offense either way, it's just, I don't like wind and I don't like hills, so this evens it out for me. What difference is this going to have as we look ahead 5 and 10 years?
Sure. I think e-bikes are great in enhancing mobility of people who can't or don't want to pedal as hard. I haven't thought a lot about e-bikes myself. I think the regulation there will have to continue to be on what speed those e-bikes are allowed to have, and then where that becomes a motorcycle and not an e-bike.
Right.
But as they are today, with the speed governing to, I think, 30 or 35? 30 kilometers an hour. I think that falls in line with what a pedal-powered bike can achieve.
Yeah.
And I think we should treat them exactly the same as we do pedal-powered bikes.
Good, I agree. And so, you know, to your comment about riding in the middle of the lane, if I'm actually, without a lot of effort, able to navigate that easily on my bike, do you see that that e-bike can have a positive effect on controlling that lane and making sure that cars understand that I too have the right to be on there? because I'm not going 5 kilometers an hour.
For sure. For sure. Regardless of speed, that is the safest place to be. It's tricky because traffic does move faster, but the visibility is there, and I think it's important for all riders, no matter how fast, to take the lane and be visible to motorists.
Okay, good, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Dowell. Councillor Flagel.
Thanks and welcome. What's your membership for Bike Regina these days?
We don't have like a sign-up membership, so it's kind of tricky other than social media followers, and that's in the thousands.
So you don't have a registry of like
No.
400 members that are Bike Regina
No,
people?
we stopped doing that. We didn't see a benefit to having a registry. We just try to reach out and communicate with everybody through social media now.
Okay. Non-electric skateboards, is there any difference between the bike and the skateboard?
I believe by the Provincial Safety Act, that would also be considered a vehicle. It's a self-propelled vehicle.
Yeah. And scooters, the same thing? I mean, we see 10-year-old kids motoring down with scooters, like with the three-wheel scooter type thing and a handle.
Yes.
And they're scooting along, so they would be in the same legislation as, I guess.
I'm not completely sure because those have a smaller wheel diameter. They're allowed, I think would be allowed
Okay.
On the streets. It might get a little bit weirding with wording in the municipal bylaws versus the Traffic Safety
Right.
Act.
So if this is in the motor vehicle, do you adhere to all the distracted driving issues? Drinking water bottles, looking at cell phones, looking down at your feet, looking down at the road as opposed to looking at the road? Where does that fit in? Because, I mean, SGI, you mentioned SGI, so where does that fit in with riding a bike in today's society?
Sure, yeah, well, drinking water, hydration is important. I think that should be allowable. Other distracted riding, things such as listening to music and stuff, I don't think the conversation has been had yet, but I think as the cycling population increases and there are issues with that and incidents happening, that we'll have to address those as well.
But, okay, if I can clarify, you're okay with riding your bike and drinking water?
Taking a swig of water as you would in a motor vehicle, is that not allowed in a motor vehicle, drinking water?
Okay, we're not be debating
Not
here.
sure.
You asked the
No,
question.
I'm just asking. Yeah, I get what you're saying.
I feel
I'm not
comfortable
sure. You know what, I
while
need to ask that
Order,
myself.
order to delegation 2, this is not a conversation, it's just a
Yeah.
question and answer, so,
Sure.
okay, just the tone is important here.
Yeah,
Sure.
I guess what I'm just trying to get at is that we have to make sure that we're playing fair. And if you have a bike that's going 10,
Councillor Flagel, a question please, to
I am. If you have a bike that's going 10 kilometers an hour and you have a scooter on the smaller wheels going 10 kilometers an hour, should you be able to share the road?
Yes,
Okay. No, I'm just checking. I just want to know where the parameters are. Thank you.
for sure.
Councillor
Appreciate
Flagel.
it.
Councillor Bersiani.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for coming forward. So I'm going to ask the question, and I did see Calgary, they did change it recently, and they've got some other things they've changed. And a lot of it, he spoke, was about education. So helmets, you said that the bikes are similar, they're considered a vehicle. So did you say that your organization does not promote or is ensuring that it should be mandatory for bikers to wear helmets through the chair?
Yes, we do not promote mandatory helmet laws because that's been shown in other places where that's been rolled out to hinder ridership and reduce ridership. For varying reasons, some people choose not to wear a helmet, and I think with the act of cycling not being in some ways different than a motor vehicle, the act of cycling is not inherently dangerous that way. There obviously are accidents that can happen, but that's, we believe, a personal risk that people should be able to choose as opposed to a mandatory law.
Okay, so you're asking us to come up with a bylaw
Yes.
to make it safer for bikers on the roadway, but safety with the helmet is not seen in the same way then, through the chair?
I think a passing bylaw makes it safer for cyclists without introducing a barrier to cycling. The helmet is an introduction of another barrier to cycling. That has been shown to reduce cycling numbers in other places.
Okay. I think a couple years ago, there was a man that was killed on a bike here in Regina. Now, do you think by having this bylaw in place, that would have, or could have hindered something like that, through the chair?
Possibly, without knowing the full details of that incident. Certainly, if nothing else, would raise more awareness around passing cyclists and how to pass cyclists safely. Some motorists may not realize how close they are to a bike and how hard it is for that bike to keep its line. I think more education around where this applies on single lane or 2-lane roads is important as well. A lot of single lane roads in Regina don't have space for the cyclist, a meter, meter and a half, the motorist, and the yellow line. I think we need to also educate on the ability to cross that yellow line on single lane. And in double lane, I think we need to educate on changing lanes when passing cyclists or other non-motorized.
Okay. So if the bylaw is in place like this, you've also obviously done some research. It talks about a fine. Do you know what other cities do in regards to the fine and what that looks like, through the chair?
I'm not sure what the fine is, no.
Okay, okay. So I guess the last question is that having something like this, do you think that it would promote more ridership if there was a bylaw in place like this that could, riders may feel safer to get out there and ride, so there's a distance?
I believe, yes, I definitely believe so. I don't experience it that much in my riding, but I hear from a lot of people who are being blitzed or passed by motorists at speed and much too closely. So having this, whether or not it's fully enforceable, is something to protect the safety of that road user.
Yeah. Sorry, and one last question. It's probably my last one. So you've obviously done your research in other cities. Have they been able to enforce it? I guess that's my only question about this is,
sure.
I'd love to have a bylaw like this. I think it's safety, but it's the same as our noise bylaw. Like, how do you get a guy that's speeding, has got a huge muffler at 6:30 in the morning, and there's no RPS around or anybody.
Mm-hmm.
No different here. It's kind of becomes a he said, she said, this is how it went. If there's no camera, how is that going to then be enforced?
Right.
Through the chair.
I think it's still something. It's something on paper, something that can be leaned on. You won't catch every occurrence, but the occurrences that you do catch, we'll definitely send a reminder to those motorists that bylaw is in place and that is a dangerous activity to pass too closely.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Shanny. Councilor Fundura.
Thank you, Brendan. Talking about safety and teaching and education and all that, I know that in getting on a bicycle and going out there, you would promote reflective gear, lights and all that. And so kind of curious about the helmet. Because if I'm looking at, you could be in the middle of the road, my concern would be there's moving things are happening. Mm-hmm. And to put someone middle of the road.
Councilor, just
So the question is, I'm having a little difficulty understanding that you wouldn't promote that.
Right. I think driving a car in the middle of the road is the same. In a collision, you are subject to a potential head injury as well in a motor vehicle. There's a lot of things we could be doing where we should be wearing helmets or could be wearing helmets, but society kind of picks and chooses what activities require a helmet and what don't. And the biggest thing for Bike Regina, a group that's trying to grow the cycling population in Regina, looking at what's happened in other cities with the mandatory helmet bylaw, is we don't want to have that in our city. We don't want to penalize people for choosing not to wear a helmet. We don't want to put an extra cost on people who, find it hard enough to even get a bike to begin with, to enhance their transportation.
Okay, to your worship. So education in elementary schools and teaching kids to get on a bike and safety, helmets are number one thing. How does your group feel about that when you go in, let's say going to school and you not necessarily stand at 100% you do support helmet?
Yeah. We actually don't talk to children. We don't know how to talk to children. We don't have training there. And since the laws are a little bit fuzzy on when a child needs to be on the road, we just don't want to touch that. So we don't do a lot of childhood education, unfortunately. We're looking for a certification that would help us to talk to children. But we don't feel comfortable telling kids that they have to be on the street according to the bylaws. In the same way with helmets, we wouldn't feel comfortable telling children that they don't have to wear a helmet because there's no bylaw. We would always encourage children and all riders to wear helmets.
Okay.
Okay, Councilor Kandera. Councilor Massanelli?
Thank you. Through the chair, you made a statement about education in public, and you mentioned the crossing of the yellow line, and I think I might need a bit of educating right now about when the right time to cross the yellow line is. How does that play out?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how the law is written, when you can cross the yellow line, but if we're going to have safe passing of cyclists, that needs to be clarified for sure, whether or not the motorists and under what circumstances the motorists can cross the line. I saw in Saskatoon's draft of the new bylaws, they define exactly how the motorists can cross the line. I'm not sure how that fits into our existing bylaws.
Perfect. I thought I was missing something. A follow-up. Do you think we should wear helmets during council meetings? No, just joking.
I think we know the answer to that one. Councilor Bryce?
Thank you. I kind of agree with my council colleagues, and I don't want to bring up the whole helmet thing again because you've already made your statement clear. So what role does Bike Regina provide? So you said you don't go into school to educate children. So tell me what you do as a representative for the biking community.
We will consult with teachers who contact us and want to, send that message to the children, and we just tell the teachers of the existing bylaws and how anything just under 20-inch wheel diameter needs to be on the street, and that's where we kind of can't go any further with that with children. As I mentioned, we're trying to get a CAN bike certification, something that would give us some different tools, but then it would also go against the sidewalk laws a little bit, so we're not sure where to navigate that one yet. We do adult workshops, and we are constantly fielding questions from adults who are asking road rules and how best to ride safely on the road.
Okay, perfect. I was looking at cycling accidents that happened and deaths and that sort of thing, of course, when we're talking about bike safety. And the last couple that seem to have happened in Regina were at night, at 7 o'clock at night, 7:30 at night. So tell me what kind of, since you know the laws of cycling, what kind of lights are required on a bike at night for them to be able to be on the road? And do cyclists know this?
It is a bylaw to have a front and rear tail light 2 hours before dark, and we teach that in our safe riding workshops for sure, and we definitely encourage people to have lights. Lights are pretty amazing nowadays. Little LED USB chargeable lights are extremely bright. Sometimes I get comments from motorists that my lights are too light or too bright, and they're blinding them, and that gives me confidence that I'm being seen. But yes, lights and reflective gear is very important, and we definitely teach that.
Okay, through you, Mr. Mayor. So that doesn't inhibit people from riding a bike, but helmet does for safety? So can you bring that all together for me?
I do this bit already. One more question on helmets. He's answered his
I
question
know,
on
well, I
helmets.
didn't want to bring it there, but we're
Well, you
talking
did,
about,
though.
it doesn't inhibit having
So
lights,
delegation.
but
Sure. Well, people choose to abide by that law, and some people choose to break it. I would much rather be visible than have a helmet on. I do wear a helmet all the time, but I think visibility is the prevention in the accident, not whether or not you're wearing a helmet. The visibility and the blinking lights is what might prevent a car from hitting you. The helmet might protect you in the event of a collision. There's a lot of studies around how the helmets do very little in a collision with a motor vehicle.
thank you. So we hear from the public at just about everything, and some of the comments we get back are sometimes cyclists aren't following the roads and they're scooting in and out, and it makes it unsafe for them. So how do you think we should respond to those sorts of things when we're talking about cyclist safety? Through you, Mr. Mayor.
That is tricky. It's a difficult thing to enforce, and I would say that law enforcement isn't doing enough, but there's a reason why they're not doing enough, because it's not a priority for them. If it were a priority for them and they were fielding enough complaints from the public, they would do that. That's where Bike Regina steps in, and we try to educate road users on those rules, and we're trying to educate as many people as we can to say that this is how we should be doing it, to garner that respect from motorists too. we need to respect each other on the road. If we don't respect each other, then road rage between motorists is the same as road rage between motorists and cyclists, and maybe in some cases worse, because we're using different vehicles.
Okay. Thank you for being here tonight.
For sure. Thank you.
Councilor Bryce. Other questions of the delegation? I have a couple of them. You indicated earlier that we need to educate the driver, which I think is important. What role will Bike Regina play if this bylaw passes in understanding this bylaw for people who ride bikes?
Right, we'll definitely add it to all of our workshop presentation material, as it will be a listed bylaw. We go through all the bylaws when we're educating. Social media, that's kind of our biggest thing to reach people who choose to follow us. So we'll definitely be promoting the new bylaw through those avenues.
I think you answered the question earlier, but you don't have a membership, a formal membership list. Do you have any indication of how big your organization is?
We know that we are the only nonprofit advocacy group for bicycling in town. Cycling is interesting in that there's a lot of different cycling groups. Most are for sport or leisure. Our audience is the commuter cyclist. Everything we do is targeting the commuter cyclist. So it's a good question. It's something that I'll definitely take back, because it's come up a couple of times, to see how we can better get a membership number. Obviously, that's of great interest to this group. So outside of our social media followers, which I don't know off the top of my head right now, we don't have a membership. A membership was, in previous years with the board at Bike Regina, was a little bit hokey. There was no fee associated with it. It was just any person you could get to put their name and email down on a piece of paper was a list, and then we'd have to maintain that. We'd send out mass emails, and people would be like, I don't want to be on this list anymore, and so forth. So we got rid of the membership.
It would be helpful if you did have some sense of what those numbers look like, but thank you very much for answering questions of council. Thank you. You return to the gallery.
For sure.
And Councilor Marie, I'm going to give the floor to you on your motion. Actually, before you do that, I want to have the city manager say he wanted to say a few things. Mr. City Manager?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to make some general comments for council's information and consideration, just about the process that we use around notices of motion. And we've seen a number of notices of motion as of late, and I just want to make sure that the process is giving you the information that you need so you can make informed decisions. So under our procedure bylaw, obviously councillors can bring forward a notice of motion. It gets read at a meeting, and then 30 days later at the next council meeting, it gets discussed. So for example, we have 4 motions tonight that are coming from notice of motion, and we have 2 new notices of motion. So it's our job as administration, obviously, to serve at the direction of council. And we're more than prepared to do that. And tonight, every notice of motion and every motion that's going to be discussed, obviously, the executive directors are prepared to speak to. But it's really important that we make sure that you have full information and you have our best advice so you can make the decisions that are best for the community. A good example is we just spent some time talking about downtown public washrooms, which came through committee, which had a full report, which gave you information, and ultimately you make a decision. So what I'd like to suggest is when when the motions get discussed following a notice of motion, obviously we move right to a recommendation that the councillor has put forward. So as a council, if you feel like you need additional information, and as an administration, obviously we're delivering programs and services to residents each and every day. We're taking action on master plans that have been approved by council, and we're taking action on all the decisions that come from committees of council and council. So there's only so much capacity that we as an administration have to undertake that work. And we're more than prepared to undertake that work if you direct us to do that. But there are times, I think, where you need a little more information so that you can make your decision. So if any of you as councillors, or when you make your decision, if you want to table a motion back to the administration, I would look at it as a bit of a scoping report. We would bring you information that would say, this is how the recommendation that you put in front of us, this is how it fits with the strategic priorities that you've asked us to take action on. This is how it impacts resources from both a human resource perspective and a financial perspective. So I'm offering, if at times you feel like you need additional information, then I would suggest through procedure bylaw, and Mr. Nicol may have some additional information, you could table the motion and request some additional information. And that's not for all notices of motion that end up as a motion. Some are pretty straightforward. It makes sense that you make an immediate decision. But for some of the more complex ones, it may make sense that you ask us to provide you additional information. And again, it's so you can make a fully informed decision, understanding all the implications to the organization. So I just leave that for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. Councilor Murray.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and thank you, Council, for discussing this. So just right off the top, there's been some discussion that we are looking at actually changing it to 50 kilometers an hour to have a more consistent law for our community. That was based off of Calgary, for clarity to Council, and also that an education campaign be included. So I believe Ms. Ackerman has that, so Council knows what they're looking at.
So we get a seconder for your motion, please. Councilor Stevens, okay.
Sure. So essentially, as you know, this is what we're asking for is a bylaw to be created right now. So this, you're not voting on enacting a bylaw, you're looking for one to be created. And what it does is it formalizes what I think most courteous motorists do most of the time. Now, that's not always the case. Personally, I've experienced blitzing, like Brandon had indicated, Councillor Stevens, as well as you look at just the numbers of cyclists hospitalized between 2014 and 2018 is 24 annually, generally. And those are all collisions with vehicles. 2 fatalities since 2012, one of them being a hit and run. And for context, both Calgary and Saskatoon, I believe, has just finished their bylaw. And that's going to be implemented, I'm guessing. And now, as far as helmets go, I know that kind of dominated a lot of the discussion. I think at this time, if a councillor feels that they want to bring forward a bylaw at another time, great. Right now, we're talking about lane designation, so I don't believe it should be attached to this bylaw. We all have had the power to bring that forward in the past. So at the end of the day, this is about cyclist protection and looking at lane designation and keeping those distances far enough that the most vulnerable vehicle on the road doesn't feel afraid and doesn't get injured. So with that, this is a good discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Murray. There are other people to speak on this. Councilor Hawkins.
Your Worship, at the end of the day, this is about safety of cyclists. And on that basis, I'd like to move an amendment. It would come after Clause 2 in the motion, and the amendment would read, cyclists in Regina be required to wear protective helmets while cycling.
Okay, if I could get a seconder for that. Councilor Bryce. Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I've argued for this for the last 7 years I've been on council, and I'm disappointed, very disappointed, about the position that Bike Regina has taken on this matter in those 7 years. I want to address directly the 2 points that Brendan made. He said, first of all, the wearing of helmets would reduce riderships on bicycles. I'm not sure that that's the case, but even if it is the case, I'm not sure we want to encourage people to ride bicycles without helmets. It seems to me that poses a very grave safety risk to them, and I'm especially concerned that children wear helmets. It's not enough just to encourage people to wear helmets. They should be required for their safety to wear helmets. Secondly, Brendan mentioned freedom. And this is an old argument. Excuse me, and councillors will remember before the time when we had seat belts in cars, there was vigorous opposition to seat belts. And the argument was, we don't want to infringe on the freedom of drivers. Well, in the end, that argument didn't carry the day. We understood that drivers have a responsibility for their own safety and for the safety of others to wear seat belts. It's absolutely imperative that the same follow for cyclists. They have a responsibility on the road to wear helmets to protect them, to protect the medical care system, and for just plain humanitarian reasons. So I'd ask for support for this amendment. Thank you.
Councillor Hawkins. On this one, Councillor Stevens, 3 minutes on an amendment, everyone.
Terrific. Thank you very much. Certainly support the main motion. This is to the amendment. My heart is warmed by this support I'm seeing from my fellow councillors for cyclists. As a cyclist, I'd love to see this investment, and I expect there to be a gush of support for a motion at budget time to radically advance the one issue that will really help people and save cyclists from injury and their life, and that's dedicated protected bike lanes, which nothing has been preventing you from doing.
Let's stick to the issue at hand, Councillor Stevens, okay?
If the issue is about safety, Your Worship, then that is the most important issue. The issue that has confronted me in terms of the proper safety protocol in the city is precisely the motion at hand. It's the buffer zone. I think in some instances of my injuries and close calls with vehicles, the only thing that a helmet would have afforded me is my wife having an open casket in an event of an injury. There's a catastrophic injuries that would have nonetheless left me either crippled or actually fatally harmed. The helmet is part of it. The safety that we're looking at, and that's actually more important, is the distance between the vehicle and the cyclist. That is the most important issue. The helmet is certainly important. I wear one. I have lights. I follow the bylaw. I encourage my kids to wear one. I think this is actually a deviation from those of us who understand the real struggles of cycling in all weather. It's not a helmet. It's the buffer zone. It's road safety. It's snow removal. It's actually making dedicated protected space for cyclists. So while I appreciate the sentiment, I think there's also competing literature that suggests that having these mandatory laws doesn't actually increase safety. And that's another side to it. Physiologically, are you more likely to survive an injury with a helmet? Yes, the science is clear, but there's actually competing evidence that suggests that it makes people feel excessively safe when they're not. So the end result isn't a safer cyclist if this is the focus. It's safer cyclists in the event of an injury. So I appreciate the concern and how this is being advanced, but ultimately what's more important is education and making roads and the public space more inviting, and again, to invest in dedicated space for cyclists in this city. I think the bike helmet issue is a distraction. I'd certainly wish that we brought this forward as a separate motion, but I don't think it is actually germane to the issue that Councillor Murray has brought before us, so I won't support it.
Not sure distraction is the way to put it, but Councillor Bryce.
I see helmets as a big safety issue, not wearing one. The delegation spoke of a big truck, their mirrors, right at the level of a head, so that's what you would run into if one was parked and you didn't actually see it. Even falling without hitting another vehicle, the incidence of head injuries are up there if they're not wearing a helmet. I see it as imperative as part of a safety piece that we as a council are bringing forward. So I disagree with Councillor Stevens, but I agree with Councillor Hawkins that helmets are just as important as the distance and for the safety of the riders.
Councillor Murray, on the amendment.
On the amendment, thank you very much. There's a reason I didn't include the helmets as this piece. I believe that every councillor who feels very strongly has had that opportunity to bring it forward, can bring that forward in the future. I see this specifically as lane designation, and moreover, in every province in Canada except for two, Saskatchewan and Quebec, it's provincially mandated on helmet laws. I don't see that as a municipal law, just like motorcycle helmets are not a municipal law. So the reason I didn't include it was specific. So I won't support it for that reason. If there's another motion coming forward, sure. I just don't think it should be tied to lane designation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Mr. Onright, you have a comment to make.
Through your worship. So just as a matter of process to the main motion.
Okay, now you're on the main motion. We're talking about the amendment right now, which is...
Okay, I wasn't sure about process. Do you want me to wait until after?
Well, probably at the end of, when we get to the main motion again.
Okay.
Might be better, yes.
Thank you.
Other speakers to the amendment? From Councillor Hawkins? I'll call the question. All those in favor of the amendment for helmets? Those opposed? Motion is defeated. So back to the main motion. I've had Councillor Murray, Councillor Hawkins, Councillor Stevens speak on the main motion? Any further? Okay. Councilor Bresciani.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I have a question to Councilor Murray. So do you know what fines have been imposed and how often, how it's been done through the chair?
Councilor
Thank you
Murray?
for the question. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I believe it's $50 in Calgary. Again, we could develop our own, but my understanding is it's generally $50. It's been implemented from cameras that people have caught it happening on, as well as officers actually witnessing the offense.
Okay. So can I just ask the process? And I think I just need a little more, I would like to see a little more information come back to council. So is the motion saying that there'll be some more, you're actually asking for just a straight, go right to a bylaw, is that accurate?
Developing a bylaw,
Okay,
correct, yeah.
developing a bylaw. So I guess I would like to as the city manager said, I actually would like a little bit more information before we go right to bylaw. And I would appreciate, like if we could table it, I guess, table this motion to bring back another, some information around what other cities have done and how they're enforced, what the stats are, as well as the fines. And I'd also be curious to know how does the helmet piece fit in any of it? I don't know. But I'll leave that for now. But I think because we're not going to get that in what you brought forward.
If I say
Would that be right?
just on a point of order here,
Sure.
we're not passing a bylaw.
No.
And we could ask the administration to provide that information when the bylaw comes forward. So maybe it'll do what you'd like to do, plus move the report forward tonight.
Would be a friendly amendment that information is
Just
all
one
in.
more, time, just 1 second, you don't have the floor. So I'll ask the administration, is it possible to do that information, provide that background information when the bylaw comes forward so we can make a decision at that time? Mr. Onright.
Through your worship, so administration would ask that the report come forward first with the information in terms of what Councilor Bresciani is asking for. Normally, when these things come together as one, administration ends up going back to redo the bylaw because there are some finite changes that are made during that process. So we'd like to bring the report forward. Just as a matter of information for council, this topic came up. We had one of our traffic engineers at the Canadian Traffic Association convention a few weeks ago, and this topic came up as a discussion point. So I only have very limited information at this point in time, so that would allow us to bring more information back in Q1 of 2020. We also, once we determine from council what direction they would like to take, we have a traffic bylaw working group, which includes Regina Police Service, our traffic engineers, our legal team, and we would also include SGI in these conversations. And that would help us also have a discussion about a communication plan as to how this would roll out to the general public.
Councilor Bresciani?
Sure. Would that be then through the just procedure?
Okay, Councilor Murray doesn't have the floor. You do.
Okay.
If you want to move a referral, you can do it. It's in order. But
Okay.
if you sit down, you can't do that. Unless I
Okay.
recognize you again.
I'd like to do the referral, but I was going to get, if other people want to
Okay,
speak,
fine.
I
Then
was
you
going to
just-
sit
that's
down.
fine. You can do that, and we'll get back to you then.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. For other speakers, Councilor Massanelli, you're next.
Thank you. Thanks for the motion, Councilor Murray. It's a good motion, I think. Listening to the delegation speak tonight, it occurred to me that there's an effect on abiding lane designations as we know them right now. Listening to Mr. Holden speak, I realized to pass one bylaw without changing those that are affected by it might be a little bit short. Would administration see any crossover with other bylaws that should be adjusted as well in regards to things like the solid yellow line crossing when the bylaw comes to an effect, or parking lanes? Are there wraparound effects we have to be addressing if we were to pass this bylaw?
Mr. Onright.
That would be part of the review and the process we would go through to bring the information back.
Okay. and this would be back to the tabling spoken of. So I guess I'll leave it to Councillor Brasciani because she spoke of it already.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Flagel.
Thanks. I'm not going to pretend to know that I know the Saskatchewan Safety Act, but I was sent this. Section 199 brackets 4 of Saskatchewan Safety Act states that no driver may commute at a speed that impedes the normal or reasonable movement of traffic on a highway or lane. The reason that I think this gentleman's bringing this up is he said he's following bikes at 10 and 15 and 20 kilometers an hour. If you go 70 kilometers an hour on the ring road, the police are going to give you a ticket because you're going too slow. So what I'd like to know, if this referral is coming through, are we creating another issue of allowing, and I'm not disagreeing that bikes shouldn't be on the road, but is there not a better way, if they're driving 10, 15 kilometers an hour and they're taking up a full lane, are we running into an issue of the Traffic Act and a ticket should be issued because they're not driving at a reasonable speed according to the Saskatchewan Traffic Safety Act? That's my first question.
Let the administration answer that then. Mr. Onright.
So as I mentioned earlier, a part of the process would be include RPS and SGI to have those discussions to see if there are any changes required or if there are any items that they are aware of that we need to be aware of.
Yeah, okay. And to clarify the question I asked of the delegation, I got confirmation that you can drink water while riding a bike.
That's good.
It's not considered distracted driving, but if you eat a hamburger, as long as it doesn't cause an accident, you can also eat a hamburger in the car. But you can be looked upon as, let me just see this here. You can be charged with undue care and attention, whether you're on a bike or whether you're on a car, if you interfere with other people on the road. So it is still a distracted driving, so I still think we should look at it. But thank you for the answer on that, because I think it's important that we know. And when we look at these types of bylaws, they're all great, but if they don't follow the Saskatchewan Highway, I think that's the right way. If it's not going according to them, we as a municipality, we get trumped by those rules. So we got to make sure that we got that straight, and I'll support the referral motion too when she brings it forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flagel. No other speakers. I'll give the floor to Councillor Brasciani.
So I'd like to table the motion. I would like to ask administration, though, when do you think this information could come back to us through the chair?
Mr. Onright.
Through your worship, we can bring the information back in Q1 of 2020.
Okay, good. So I've just added in there that that it be brought back to Community Protective Services with information including options, any implications, protective gear such as helmets, etc., and consultation with other municipalities related to implementing a fine structure and enforcement bylaw respecting cycling safety. I'd like to ask Councillor Murray, is that okay with you, or?
Yeah, it's on the same timeline, so I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah.
Is there anything that you need added in there?
As well as how all this fits in with dedicated
Absolutely.
biking infrastructure and cycling safety for sure.
The with the bike lanes, like the distance, is that clear in there, or do you want that added?
Yeah, in cycling safety, I would imagine administration would take that as distances, bike lanes, everything.
On, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, seems like a robust discussion around cycling.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Agenda. Move forward to the delegation of Dick and Maria Wellman. If you could come forward, please. Good evening and welcome to Regina City Council. You have 5 minutes for your presentation. You identify yourself, who you represent. There will be questions from members of council afterwards.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good evening, councillors. My name is Dick Wellman. I own one of the properties that is the subject of the Finance and Administration Committee's recommendation, and I'd like to speak in favor of the committee's recommendation. I had last week, or maybe it was even this week, October 24th, I wrote a letter to the councillors that's pointed out that I believe the recommendation sets a strong precedent. It follows the existing tax mitigation principles, and I believe it is fair and equitable for both the city and the farmland owners on several levels. The recommendation is consistent with the decision of council in February 2019 to apply mitigation to farmland in eastern Regina. The Finance and Administration Committee questioned the city administration about the permanency of the tax mitigation. It was told that it only lasts as long as the property use stays the same. It was also advised that the laws are in place to reassess the property upon any change of use. The recommendation only applies for the years 2019 to 2023. With council's approval in 2024, it may be extended to 2028. Under mitigation, property tax increases will continue to apply to the farmland in question. The land receives no city services. The only reason this issue, I believe, is before council is because the land was labeled as being in the $300,000 population category. All farmland in the $500,000 population category receives mitigation. In closing, my great-grandfather farmed the land that is now Regent Park. My grandfather and my father farmed the land that is now Northwest Regina. And my wife and I farm the land that is now on the western boundary of the city of Regina. And we will continue to farm it for the foreseeable future. Mitigation would return us to a municipal tax rate similar to what other farmers pay, both in the city and in the municipality, and in fact, in the city of Moose Jaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wellman, for your presentation. Other questions of the delegation? Councillor Flagel.
Thank you. Welcome. The report says that there's 3 landowners that will get this exemption.
Yes.
Do you think that's fair when there's other landowners that are in similar situations to you?
Well, I take responsibility for my taxes, and I had the initiative to, as the other 2 landowners did, to come forward and speak to the committee to express our concerns and our objections to the loss of mitigation. So I think every other landowner also has that ability, and they need to exercise their rights to come forward. And the recommendation does not prohibit them from coming forward in the future. So if they choose to come forward, the committee can assess their arguments on the merits that they bring forward.
Sure. What to you through you, Mr. Mayor, is what the difference between the 2, the exempted tax and the non-exempt tax? What's the difference in dollars and cents per year to you?
Well, my taxes went up 2.3, 2.4 times.
Without the exemption?
Without the exemption.
Okay. Good. Perfect. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Flagel. Councillor O'Donnell.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Evening, sir. Notice Mr. Farley's with you. Mr. Farley and I have talked many times. I'm asking this question first. You currently receive no city services?
Correct.
But nor are you looking for any city service?
Correct.
Is that right?
Correct.
In your estimation, if you were to receive this, do you believe that based on the current rate of growth that there'd be any houses on your land 5 years from now?
No.
And I'm going to stretch that 10 years from now.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Donnell. Councillor Bresciani.
Thank you. Thank you for coming forward. So how did you know to kind of get on this and come forward to council?
Well,
Through the chair.
my neighbor let me know. I don't know how James found out about it, but I mean, I should have been more aware of it, but James let me know, and so then I called to your city staff and asked them how do I go about expressing concerns, and they were very helpful, and I came forward to the committee, and then the committee was helpful, and here I am today.
Okay, well, thank you. So the question I have is in regards to your neighboring properties. They have also agriculture lands like you do.
Yes.
Farmed for many years.
Yes.
And they have not come forward.
Yes.
Probably would be the same response that Councillor O'Donnell had asked you. Is that land, do you see that land being developed in the next 5 to 10 years? No. So I guess the question I ask is, would you feel that it would be fair that as a council we would include those other landowners that were not aware, didn't have someone in the know to come and say, you know what, you're my neighbor, I want you to know this. This would be the same for all of our land because we're all doing the same thing. Would you be in agreement with that through the chair?
Well, I mean, it's up to council to decide how to go forward, but I think the committee grappled with that question. Yeah. And I think they decided that they could only make a decision on what's before them, and to speculate on what is the actual use of some of this other land, how it came into being, how the titles might have transferred in the 5-year period. There was too many unknowns to really reach out further than the option 2 that was presented to them.
So through the chair, so again though, where this land is located in the next 5 to 10 years, do you see development on these lands?
Pardon me?
So
I
again,
don't see development
no,
happening.
you do not?
No.
Okay.
He's not on the land that is on the Dewdney West,
Yeah.
close to me. No.
Okay, good. Thank you for coming forward.
Thank you, Councillor Barshandy. Councillor Bryce.
Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight and at Finance and Admin as well. I just have a quick question. So for the people watching, this doesn't mean that you're not going to pay any tax. Am I correct?
No.
So what does it mean?
Well, it means that I pay, in my mind, I pay taxes in accordance with the use of the land, which is farmland. So I pay farmland taxes, a farmland tax rate.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And to that end, what services do you have on that land right now?
No services.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. If there are no other questions from council, you can return to the gallery, and we'll now look at the report from Finance Administration. Councillor Bryce.
Thank you. I move CR 19-95, which is the Dewdney West Boundary Alterations 2019 Property Tax Exemption Request.
Could I have a seconder for that, please? Seconder for, okay. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you. The recommendations from Finance and Admin were that the property tax mitigation tools outlined in option 2 in this report be approved, and that the properties set out in Appendix D, Part A, be exempted from property taxes in accordance with the percentages outlined in Appendix D, Part A, and described in option 2 of this report, and that the bylaw be brought forward as mentioned in 3. We did look at the blanket of providing this type of exemption for all that land out there, but we felt that it would be appropriate to look at individually at each property as it comes forward. If somebody's asking us to relook at something, we're willing to do that. But just because one person does doesn't mean we need to blanket everybody with the same exemption. So these people came forward asking for the exemption. We took a good look at it. We debated it wholesomely and decided that yes, these 3 properties should get this exemption that they're asking for. That's how we came to that decision. We did talk about, as I said, the blanket of having all of the properties put into that, but we are keepers of the tax money, and why would we give money out if nobody's asking for it? So we thought that it'd be prudent for us to look at each case individually. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bryce. Other speakers to the report? Call the question. All those in favor? Got to be faster. Councillor Barshandy.
So I have I really and I'd like to ask administration, I guess. I really am torn on this. When the ones that come forward that are in the know, they're going to be granted this. The ones that aren't, so we're pitting one against the other, and they're all the agriculture lands. For the farmer that's not going to have his land developed in the same amount of time as the delegation indicated, just because they don't know, it doesn't mean that they didn't want it or need it. I think it's our job as a council to set policy, and policies should be fair for everyone in that area. So I'd like to recommend that we look at option 4.
Okay, we're going to have to defeat this motion first, and then we go for it. But we stay on this amendment. If you want to go to another option, we have to defeat this motion and then go to yours if this is defeated.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Flagel?
Thanks. I don't like this at all because we have land that is around the city that is not being utilized at all. And whether you live on the land, you're around there, and having Mr. Farley as an informational piece to tell his neighbors is great. But if there's vacant owners that own this land and rent it out as farmland, they shouldn't be penalized because there's been a 5-year exemption, and now the exemption's up, and now because they didn't respond, oh well, too bad. We're taking their money and these other 3 people are getting it, and next year somebody else will apply. I believe that if you can pull out a whole bunch of scenarios as to whether you should get an exemption or not, it's no different than years ago they did a mortgage rebate. Well, if you didn't send the paperwork in, the government still gave you the mortgage rebate based on your numbers. And whether if you did or you didn't, you got the rebate because that was the government program at the time. This is a government program that we're allowing a rebate or an exemption to some, and yet there's what, 30, how many actually were on the original exemption? 33? 31? So now there's going to be 28 people that we're going to kind of gouge a little bit because they didn't know or didn't apply. I don't think that's fair. I don't think any one of us would want that if it happened to us. And I don't think we should be the ones that are taking it out to the street and saying, yes, these 3 or 4 people get it because they were informed, no disrespect. But if you weren't informed, that doesn't mean you're still not a landowner and a property owner and you're paying taxes and you're not getting any services just like the delegation got. So these people are no different other than they didn't apply for it. I don't think that's fair. I think they should all get it.
Thank you, Councillor Flagel. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to have administration talk about Appendix D that lists all the properties that we looked at Finance and Admin. And could you give us some information about how many of those are actually agricultural properties that are being farmed? Which ones might be properties that were bought on speculation and are not being farmed, and are some of them commercial properties?
Mr. Lacey.
Through you, Your Worship, so Appendix D lists all of the agricultural properties that were annexed into the city back in 2013 that are in the new neighborhood or 300,000 pop development zone, or in the commercial corridor in the 300,000 pop development zone. So all of these properties are classified as agricultural. Whether they're farmed or whether they're sitting vacant and there's no active farming activity on them, we don't collect or have that information. There would not be commercial activity on these properties because they'd be classified as commercial. And there would be only one other comment I'd just make for council as far as information. with respect to services, and there being no services provided to these properties. So I would just mention, like all agricultural properties, there's police, there's fire, our road system is used, so the taxes that are collected do go towards those pieces. Now, the utility, if you're not using water, there's obviously no utility fees being collected.
So then my other question would be, so none of these properties on Appendix D are being developed at this point in time?
Mr. Lacy?
Through you, Your Worship, the properties on Appendix D are all agricultural, and to my knowledge, none of them are currently under development.
And do all of them pay agricultural taxes?
Mr. Lacy?
Through you, Your Worship, agricultural taxes referring to property taxes?
Yeah.
Yes. So through you, Your Worship, so they are classified as agricultural, so they will be assessed as agricultural land. The province as well then applies a discount, so to speak, to the assessed value. So the assessed value, I think, is 55% of the assessed value, and then the municipal mill rate is applied to the value of the property.
Is there any difference about whether it's being farmed or not in terms of the taxes that are charged?
Through you, Your Worship, no. If it's classified as agricultural, it is assessed as agricultural and taxed appropriately.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor Fundura.
Thank you, Your Worship. To you, did the other owners within this, what's happening, did the other owners were notified that this is happening?
Mr. Lacy?
Through you, Your Worship, my understanding is that when the tax mitigation measures were put in place approximately 5 years ago, there would have been notice that went out then. And so the notice with respect to the change in the property tax for 2019 would have been part of their tax assessment, or their tax notice that went out.
Okay, so then just so to Your Worship, so it's clear, are we just talking about 500,000 growth or 300,000 and 500,000? So because mitigation will look at just 500,000, what are we doing? Are we doing 300,000 and 500, or just the 500,000 is included in this mitigation?
Mr. Lacy?
Through you, Your Worship, so when the annexation occurred in 2014, there were 3 categories of property tax mitigation. One of those categories has already expired. There was a category for those properties in the 300,000 growth development zone. At that point in time, the property tax mitigation on those properties was just for 5 years. So the 3 properties before you today were in that second category of only receiving mitigation for 5 years. So that's why they're here today, is their mitigation that 5 years is up. Then there was a third category of properties in the 500,000 growth zone. Council, there was a report referred to here earlier back in February. So council for those 500,000 plus did get an extension of the mitigation for another 5 years, which was consistent with the conversations that happened 5 years ago. The one, if I could call it, twist to that, there was a group of properties in that third category in the southeast that, because of changes to the OCP subsequent to the annexation in 2014, are now in the city's 300,000 POP zone. And council made the decision that those properties should continue to get that tax mitigation for an additional 5 years, consistent with what was communicated to them 5 years ago, even though subsequent to then they had moved from the 500,000 POP to the 300,000 POP area.
Okay, so through Your Worship, what I'm hearing is that the properties that we are in question now are coming for second round of mitigation. Did I understand that correct?
Mr. Lacy?
Through you, Your Worship. So just to be clear, these properties are in that second category, where the initial communication 5 years ago would be that their exemption would expire in 2018. So now they're being taxed in 2019. I think essentially they've come forward and asked for similar treatment to those properties
in the 500,000 pop zone.
Okay. Thank you, Worship.
Any other speaker? Okay. Councillor Murray.
Thanks. I'm just trying to get some clarity around the future long-term growth, Part A, Schedule A, the percentage of exemption on the addresses. Is that the percentage of the land that would be exempted of that specific property? Am I reading that correct?
Mr. Lacy?
Just through you, Your Worship, just clarification, are you referring to Appendix C or D?
I believe it's Appendix C. Let me just see.
Appendix C?
Page. Yeah. It's right below, so there's the first recommendation of a bylaw with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just below that, there's a list of the properties in future long-term growth. It's not showing me a page. Oh, sorry. It would be page 150 of the whole agenda.
Mr. Lacy?
It starts there. It continues down to page 150.
Through you, Your Worship, I think I'll refer that question to Ms. Bryden. I do believe she has the page number while I look for it here.
Ms. Bryden.
Through you, Your Worship. So I think the percentage you're referring to is on Appendix D.
Okay.
And that percentage is the amount we've adjusted the assessment so that the taxes would be the equivalent to what they would have been at within the RM.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. So, Councillor Bryce, if you speak now, you close debate. Okay. Is there any other questions? I just have one question on the just for clarification for the properties in question. Are they being singled out because they were already treated earlier? I'm trying to figure out why we would not look at the other recommendation, which is for all the categories. Recommendation number 4, all properties in the new neighborhood of 300,000. Why are they being these 3 properties being separated from them?
So
Mr. Lacy?
through you, Your Worship, to clarify, so all the properties you see in Appendix D would have been part of Category 2. Their property tax exemption expired in 2018. The reason these 3 properties are before you is they've requested that exemption to continue for another 5 years, or that partial property tax mitigation to continue for another 5 years. So we are only dealing with these 3 as they made a request of council to consider that.
But it's only because those 3 came forward. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Councillor Bryce to close debate. 3 minutes on closing debate.
I won't take 3 minutes. So we are talking about today the 3 properties that came forward asking for this to be prolonged, for us to actually prolong this mitigation. So that's what we're ultimately talking about today. We're not talking about the blanket of all of these properties. We did debate that at Finance and Admin, but these were the 3 that came forward. So my question to administration is, all of the tax notices went out to all the property owners. Am I correct?
Mr. Lacy?
Through you, Your Worship, that's correct.
Is the city's phone number on all those tax notices?
Mr. Lacy, hope you know that.
Through you, Your Worship, my wife looks at our tax bills, but Ms. Bryden does tell me the phone numbers are on the tax bill.
Okay, thank you. So if anybody had a problem with the information they got on their tax notice, they would have called the city. What would the city have told them when they called the city? Too bad, so sad, or there's a process that they can go through you, Your Worship?
Thank you. Mr. Lacy?
Through you, Your Worship, through that process, I'd imagine that if the applicant or the individual phoning in wished to know how they could have their property taxes that mitigation be extended, there would be a conversation about the process in which they could make that request.
Thank you. So we don't all need Mr. Farley living next door to us to tell us that there's a process in place if we don't like what's going on. So at Finance and Admin, we did look at it. We looked at the 3 property owners that came forward and said, we'd like some mitigation here because we're still farming this land. This land has been in our, we're not using this land as speculation for growth. We're actually farming it what we've always done. That's what we looked at Finance and Admin, and that's why we voted this way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bryce. You've closed debate, so I'll call the question. Yep. Mr. Clerk?
Thank you, Your Worship. I will call on Councillor Bryce as you move the motion.
In favor.
Councillor Young.
In favor?
Councillor Flagel.
Opposed?
Councillor Bresciani.
Opposed.
Councillor Findura.
Opposed.
Councillor Hawkins.
In favor?
Councillor O'Donnell.
In favor?
Councillor Mancinelli.
In favor.
Councillor Murray.
In favor.
Councillor Stevens.
Opposed.
Mayor Fougere.
Opposed.
Count is 6-5. The vote carries, Your Worship.
Motion's carried. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for that. Now we'll move on to Executive Committee report. Councillor Stevens, this is the solar project with a dream request.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Through the chair, if I actually, for starters, could I get a seconder for this motion, please?
Would you read what it is first?
Yes.
Read the motion first.
CR 19-93.
Say what it's about. Just so the viewing public knows what we're talking about.
Yeah. Sorry, I just had some notes here.
Report 93.
Yeah, I just want to get the full title here. Solar Project Dream Request.
Okay. Seconder? Councillor Massinelli.
Great, thank you. This was a really interesting debate, and I think what made it interesting is that you had a developer plus a green energy developer coming forward for what was ultimately tax abatement and being excused from service agreement fees. What made it interesting was this was really a finance request, but it got us talking about the reality of the sustainability framework and how we need to look at the use of city land to reach our 2050 renewable Regina target. We saw a presentation about the project itself. Again, a big protracted discussion about the use of underutilized lands, the importance of seeing renewable energy projects in the city. But again, this was a tax issue and a service agreement fee issue. So to that point, if I could ask administration to provide us with a high-level overview of the report and the implications, please.
Mr. Lacey.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair. So maybe just as way of background here, Sask Power is currently in the process of procuring 10 megawatts of solar power under a 20-year purchase agreement through an RFP proposal. So they're really looking for third-party private partners to come forward with that. The city has been approached by International Renewable Energy Company, Kruger, partnering with a local firm, West Source, to participate. They plan on participating in that RFP. And their request of the city was to consider financial support for a solar panel project, including deferral of the service agreement fees and a property tax exemption on any incremental tax that would be applied to that land with a solar project going on it. Administration recommendation was to defer the SAFs related to that property, deferral, not cancellation or termination of the SAF fees, the service agreement fees. Because the solar farm is only temporary in nature and doesn't require access to city services. So in 20-25 years, when that land is developed, SAF fees would be payable by the developer at that time. With respect to the property tax exemption, administration is or did recommend conditional support for a property tax exemption in the form of a 40% exemption to their property taxes. So currently it's agricultural land. It is actually land that was annexed in, getting back to our last conversation, that's in the 500,000 POP zone. And that percentage is about a 40% partial exemption they're currently getting. So what administration is recommending that should a solar panel farm be built there, there will be a new assessed value on that land, and whatever that assessed value is, that 40% exemption would continue. What that means is that the city would receive an additional approximately $12,000 more annually in property taxes than it's receiving today.
Thank you, Mr. Lacey. Other speakers to the report? Do you want to continue on? Go ahead.
Through the chair. So we're working towards the sustainability framework. Where did you get the numbers from? So what benchmark are we using? I think we're kind of shooting in the dark a little bit, but there's a method to it. So why do we get this approach to the SCFs? Why do we get this tax mitigation number?
Mr. Lacey?
I'm asking about the formula that got us to where we're at in the report and the recommendation.
Through you, Your Worship, so it's estimated that this land would use approximately 100 acres of land. And so there was a SAF calculation that was undertaken using an assumption of 100 acres and what the SAF fees would be associated with it. I'm not sure if that answers what you were asking for.
I have a follow-up through the chair. So if we get these requests down the road, underutilized land, we're deferring it from commercial real estate development, we're going to use it instead for renewable energy, is this now the number that we will use going forward? In other words, is this essentially the framework for how we would deal with taxes and SAFs for all future renewable energy projects?
Mr. Lacey?
Through you, Your Worship, I think we would have to look at each individual proposal that came forward on an individual basis. This happens to be a solar panel project. There could be other renewable projects as an example that might have other impacts on city services as an example that would require us to make a different assessment and possible recommendation to council.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Further discussion on the report? All those in favor? Oh, yeah. Councillor O'Donnell, I was raising the question.
Yep, thanks. So I was not part of the discussion, and so I read this with great interest. I point out two things. The first one is that SAS Power is the one who's reaching out with a potential contract here. And I think that's important to us. It's important to us in terms of what that could mean for a city in the future. While this is private and this is private land and so on, what does this mean if we, for example, are pulling gas out of the landfill at a greater rate, and what does that mean for the grid in the future? So I think there's a foundation piece here that matters to me in terms of SAS Power's reaching out, and they're reaching out within a city. I'm certainly aware of some other solar projects that tend to be out in the country, tend to be along highway and so on. I see that as being a little different. My second point on this is that if we really are going to work down this path of being a sustainable city, we also have to have some skin in the game. Skin in the game means dollars. And in this case, it seems to make sense on this project to me that there's still a tax being paid. There might be some deferrals on SAF, but there's still income coming into land that is not being used, not going to be developed, and so on. And so I think those two principles of what SAS Power reaching out and to the fact that we put some financial skin in the game matters to me. I'll be supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor O'Donnell. Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too will be supporting it for the reasons that Councillor O'Donnell has given, but I rise to say that this is not an easy decision for me. I want to point out 5 in the recommendation. The City Council requests Economic Development Regina to work with the City Administration to begin steps to develop a policy that would provide guidelines for future requests for economic development support within the City of Regina. That's a policy that we desperately need. It is extremely uncomfortable to consider this as a one-off because we don't have that policy framework. I'm supporting it because it's such a worthy project, but we do need that policy framework. The second thing I would say on this is we don't really know where the benefit of the tax exemption is going to land, because we don't know really what the contract between Dream and the energy company looks like. And further to that, we're doing this at a time of an RFP process that's ongoing. We're effectively giving a subsidy here, and you do want to ask yourself the question, do we distort that fairness of the RFP process by intervening in the middle of it in this way? So for those reasons, I'm hesitant, but for the reasons of the value of the project, which Councillor O'Donnell has outlined, I will support it.
Thank you, Councillor Hawkins. Councillor Bresciani.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too support the project. I do have a question for administration, though, if until we have a policy, or what is the time frame on this policy coming forward? Through you, Mr. Mayor.
Lacy.
Through you, Your Worship, at Exec Committee we talked about returning within the year. I know there's a desire on the part of Council for us to return as soon as we can, so we will make best efforts to return with the policy for Council's consideration as soon as possible, but within the year.
Okay, thank you for that. I know that as we're having a sustainability conference, I hope that we're not waiting till that conference is here and then we get it going. I hope we can be part of the conference to speak to the development, and I know reaching out to other municipalities as well that have developed these. The last question I have for administration is if other projects come forward for incentives and that kind of thing until we have a policy in place, are we going to be looking at these the similar way that we did in regards to this project as well? Through the chair.
Mr. Lacy.
Through you, Your Worship. So to your first comments, that we certainly will begin that process with respect to researching and reaching out to what other jurisdictions are doing, et cetera, with respect to the policy, and not wait for the conference. That work will begin quickly. With respect to your second question, just one quick.
Yeah, just in regards to if other groups come forward or.
Thank you. So through you, Your Worship, so certainly if in the meantime, should other proposals or requests be made of the city to consider economic development activity or activity that complements the city's broader sustainable renewable motion, that we would have to look at those on a one-off basis, and we'd bring them to council then on a one-off basis until we can get that policy framework in place.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Bresciani. Other speakers? Councillor Dallin, could you take the chair for a moment, please?
Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I fully support the project. It's very exciting, and I have a question to the administration. It relates to the exemption. For the purpose of the people watching tonight and for council, can the administration describe who benefits from the exemption? Is it the land developer or the project?
Through you, Your Worship, how it has been described to us as the parties involved here is that the property tax is a flow-through, so it goes right to the cost-benefit analysis that the energy company is doing with respect to what it likely would put forward to SAS Power as its pricing structure. So it's been described as a flow-through from DREAM to to Kruger Energy.
That's important to note. That's who will benefit from the 40% exemption, and I support that even more so when it goes to the company that's trying to make this a feasible enterprise to go forward. I think it's a great project, and I'm thankful that council appears to be fully supportive of this one. I know we're an executive committee that was very much stated. I think it's important as well that we know that the conversation at executive committee was clear to Economic Development Regina. We did not want to wait for a full year to have that exemption policy in place and before council. I've spoken with the CEO of EDR as well as the chair and urged them to move forward in this in a way that's fairly aggressive, because we have, once you make one exemption, others will follow. And we need to have our policy framework in place. I don't like one-offs either, but I also don't want to miss this opportunity, so I think we should do this one. Thank you.
Cool.
Councillor Murray.
Keep my comments very brief. can we, I know we've been indicated from Dream that there would be a flow through to this project. Can we stipulate that on the exemption itself, just to ensure that? I understand it's goodwill, but.
I think it's all part of the agreement already in place, I believe. Mr. Lacy, you want to try that one?
Through you, Your Worship, we certainly have not had that conversation with the parties involved. If that is council's desire, that is certainly something that we can take up with the parties.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Murray. I see no other speakers to the report. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We're on report 94. This is the application for title. Councilor Bryce.
Thank you. I rise to bring forward CR 19-94, which is the application for title for the 2019 liens. If I could have a seconder.
Seconder for that, please.
Seconded.
Councilor Young.
Thank you. So this is the annual report that comes through. So the recommendations from Finance and Admin were that the manager, property tax and utility billing be authorized to serve 6 months notice to all parcels of land included in the list of lands marked as Appendix A, and second, that the manager, property tax and utility billing be authorized to process the next steps in tax enforcement upon the expiry of the 6-month notice.
Thank you, Councilor Bryce. Do you have some speakers to it? Councilor O'Donnell.
Thanks very much. So can I ask first, the number here, I think it was 533, is that consistent with other years, higher or lower, please?
Mr. Lacy.
Through your worship. So the number is slightly higher and consistently growing a little bit with the number of accounts that we add to the tax roll every year.
A follow-up question to that, if I could, please. So there's, again, 533 or whatever that's listed before. Does that mean that in all cases they have not paid any portion of their tax, or would they have, in some cases, paid a portion of their property tax?
Ms. Bryan?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely, there's lots of cases where we have tax payment plans set up with our customers, but even though we have tax payment plans, we still move along in the tax enforcement process to a certain extent.
Thank you. So it's possible that some of these people only owe a portion of their tax?
Absolutely, yes.
Thanks. And if push came to shove and it is a normal year, how many properties do we actually end up going all the way on this where we are petitioning for the property to become ours?
Ms. Biden?
Through your worship, last year we took one title. Previous years we didn't take any. It just depends, but generally not very often.
Thank you for that. So the basis of the answer to me seems that it's always, we mostly are able to work this out so that one, taxes are collected, and two, people don't lose their property. Is that a fair comment?
Ms. Biden?
Through the chair, that's absolutely correct.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Other speakers to, okay, Councilor Fundura?
Thank you, Worship. One question. Are all these properties just your basic tax, or is it some would come from like compliance orders are not being paid for and things like that? Is some of those on there, or is just all just like owning house tax? Was there something with the compliance, or?
Ms. Biden? No, Mr. Biden?
Through you, Mr. Chair. In some cases, there would be transfers for other charges that get transferred to the tax roll, for sure.
Okay, so like I think Councilor O'Donnell asked about, so what happens if that continues to keep going? You said you didn't take any titles back, only one. It's very rare. So what happens? How long does this continue to go on?
Ms. Biden?
Through you, Mr. Chair. When we set up tax payment plans with customers, our goal is to have a payment plan in place where they'll be current at the current tax level within 2 years, and hopefully on tips within 2 to 3.
Okay, and to your worship, one more question is that if someone just plainly refuses, what do we do? If someone just plain refuses?
Through the chair. If someone just refuses to make payments, then we just proceed down the tax enforcement process.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Bandera. Other speakers to the report? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Moving to motions, we have the first motion related to Recreation Infrastructure Program. Councillor Hawkins?
Thank you, Your Worship. This is a happy story. It's maybe one of the happiest stories of my time on council. I held the pen on this motion, and I'll explain the motion in just one moment, but it's supported by all the councillors and yourself. The Recreation Infrastructure Program is a program modeled after the local roads infrastructure program. Its genesis was in the comment made that we have the Recreation Master Report and no means to fund it. And this is meant to provide a means to fund it. It proposes a dedicated 0.5% mill rate increase in each year for 5 years between 2020 and 2024. That would raise a little over $1 million in the first year for recreation infrastructure, rising to $6 million in the 5th year of the program, and then that becomes $6 million through the fund built up every year thereafter. Everybody has recognized the critically important nature of recreation, but we had a vivid illustration of it at Friday luncheon in connection with the hockey. One of the chiefs speaking spoke of the difficult time that the kids, the indigenous kids on the reservations had the difficult time that they'd had with residential homes and so on. And then he said, you know, but the one bright spot in their life was the hockey rink. And I think that comment was not only tremendously moving in that context, but it reminds us how important recreation is for young kids. It's a way away from drugs and gangs. It's a way of gaining self-confidence and learning to teamwork. So that's what this is directed all about. I want just finally to say, Your Worship, how much I appreciate the work of my colleagues in this. You know, I spoke to each one of you. I spoke to Councillor Stevens, and he told me I should be broader. I spoke to Councillor Bresciani, and she reminded me that in my ward and in her ward, we have new subdivisions with no recreation facilities. The 1%, the 0.05 of every mill rate is just a copy of the wonderful program that Councillor Young championed with respect to local roads. So that the fingerprints of the whole council are on this motion. I'm just pleased to be the carrier before council.
So for the record, although we all signed it, we'll need someone to second this motion on the floor. Councillor Young. Okay. Further discussion. Councillor Murray.
Thank you very much. I just would like to rise and recognize both Councillor Hawkins and Councillor Young. To me, this looks a lot like our residential road renewal program. The two of you had seen an issue for funding, and you looked at a long-term plan. So I wanted to appreciate both of you on that and seek support from the rest of the council. Looks like we already have it. So thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. Councillor Young.
Thank you, Your Worship. Would really like to thank everyone for signing on to this. And I'm going to mention the residential roadway plan because that now is completed, and we had 1% for 5 years, and now we have $12 million every year plus 25% of the roadways budget, which is about 18 million, give or take, each year that's devoted to residential roadways, and that's what makes it so positive. So this would be devoted to recreation, just like the roadways was. So I think it's a good next step for us to take. Ward 1 is an older ward in the city, and it has no recreation facilities either. So.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Councillor Flagel.
Thank you. Well, Ward 10 doesn't have any either, so there. We're close, though.
Let's rise above that.
We have some closeness. The old adage of sport, culture, and recreation, hopefully with this, will be alive and well, and that's the biggest challenge. And if you build it, they will come. We just went through this whole thing and with the stadium, and regardless of what some people may have thought It was a fabulous weekend. It was a great weekend of sports, culture, because we had a lot of different groups there supporting their own groups, and recreation. The build of the stadium and the talk of the stadium in 2013, back in 2008, 9, whatever, was never ever talked about having an NHL hockey game. But we just had one this weekend because we have the facilities. The young people of this city want facilities. They want sport, culture, and recreation, and that's a key. There's a lot of things, but what I want to know is, if this passes and goes through, what does 0.5 do to start a bank account for the recreational facility? What does that mean to the city in terms of dollars and cents?
Mr. Lacey.
Through you, Your Worship. So, what it means initially is there's a little over $1 million in year one, which would be year 2020, to put towards recreational infrastructure. I think the power of the motion here is, though, the accumulated effect. So just like the residential road program, over time, that fund would build on a dedicated mill rate of, as noted in the motion here, just under $7 million. So that would be $7 million every year that we could put towards to advancing our ability to implement the recreational master plan. And so I'll leave it at that. That's really what it means.
Thanks. Through you, I was just wondering, when the federal government or provincial government come to the city and say, hey, we have some money, they generally want you to match it or third it or whatever. Have we got any ability today to go after money for sport facilities or recreational facilities for kids' sport? Is there anything out there today that we maybe haven't gone after because we don't have that down payment kind of a thing, or 30%?
Lacey?
Through you, Your Worship. So I think one of the more significant plans out there is the Infrastructure Canada investment plan, which has been before council here before. We are required under that. So first off, rec projects. That is a qualifying stream within that funding level. As a municipality, we would be required to put some funding towards that, and that has always been our challenge in finding that funding. And in the past, I think we've talked about debt being a possible option. If we have this infrastructure funding, that would certainly be a ready source that we would look at to provide our matching contribution.
Great, thanks. A couple of things that, whether we're lacking them or there's potential down the road, and through you, Mr. Mayor, the fact that we've got some land that's available at the RRI, we've got, I know we've sort of decided that we've tagged it for housing and commercial and residential, et cetera, but if you look at our OCP, we've changed that probably 4 or 5 times. We've amended it because cultural and community-wise and economics don't always dictate exactly how a plan should go, because maybe we don't need any more houses here, maybe we don't need any more commercial here, maybe. So with the recreational plan that we have, how flexible is that plan? Is it carved in stone that we can't change it? Can't change land usage?
Mr. Holden.
So through Your Worship, the Recreation Master Plan is exactly that. It's a long-term plan.
Right.
Obviously, it identifies the priorities for infrastructure investment. And then, the Regina Revitalization Initiative was truly identified as a generational opportunity. So the building of Mosaic Stadium, and then, of course, the rail yard development, and then the Taylorfield neighborhood. So obviously, the situation within your community changes in terms of development. I mean, we all know right now that we're a little bit slower in terms of economic activity. So it's still the fact that we have such an assemblance of land that will provide us a great opportunity as a community. So as items come forward out of the Recreation Master Plan, as other proposals come from developers, et cetera, I think that's when we have an opportunity to take a look at what's the best opportunity to move forward with development in what location. And that's obviously information that council will make the final decision on.
Perfect, thanks. Through you, I just wanted to talk, because we're gonna look at building a new bridge on Winnipeg Street North, crossing over into Uplands, down Winnipeg Street, widening it, and there's Mount Pleasant Sports Park is right there, Curry Field, and I would hope that we at least take a look at, because we need to widen that road, we need to get into that piece of land. I know the RRI has got a vacant chunk of land that, I mean, if we want to put a centerpiece for something, a ball diamond down there with a sports park and a skating rink and a skateboard park, etc., all those types of things, because when we're developing, we seem to have left the sport piece out of RRI because it's been mostly commercial and that. But if you want to attract people, like we did this weekend, you need sporting events, sporting facilities, sporting places. And I just want to make sure that we keep that in mind, because I know that the Curry Field people are starting to look at, like, it'd be nice to have somewhere different, and maybe this is a way to start kickstarting these types of things, as well with Taylor Field land, which we're going to talk about next in a parking lot for the time being. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Councilor Brashani.
Thank you, Worship. So I want to thank Councillor Hawkins for bringing this forward. Talked a few times in this regard, but I want to say that one thing I heard with the roads, when the 1% was going to roads, the residents really appreciated that it was being directed to something and they could see the results. And it's just not going into anything and then it kind of comes out here and there. It's sprinkled everywhere. So the designation, I think, for residents is very, very important. Sport, culture, recreation, those are things that usually fall to the bottom of the list. And they are our most, I want to say, one of the most important for wellness, health, and at the end of the day, I think when we designate this 0.5, I think that, I don't know if you guys remember that young fellow that came from my ward that wanted a skating rink. He's still waiting. Still asks me, is it coming this year? No, it's not coming this year, but hopefully it can come next year. And I think those are the things that people want to see, when, especially in the growth areas where we've okayed the development, say, grow it, keep selling houses, get out there. But we need some more facilities to facilitate those people who live in those communities too, but also refurbish the ones that are falling apart too. So it's a balancing act. But thank you to Councillor Hawkins for bringing this forward.
Councillor O'Donnell.
Thanks very much. First comment is on process. If we were to analyze a little bit about what goes on south of the border, often in cities or states in the U.S., they have referendums that go before the electorate. And they often are large in number, but in order for them to actually do this, they have to have the support of the community and they vote. But what's always important about what they vote on is it has a sunset clause. So the real true meaning for me in terms of that 1% on roads was that it had a start and a finish, and people would understand that in terms of tax dollars and then therefore, of course, the program. That's what this says as well. So I appreciate not only the number, 0.5%, but that there is a process here that it begins and ends and has a 5-year term. People can relate to that. 2, a decision was made in this city different than other cities. I'm going to say that again. Way different than other cities, that we would develop in the inside of our city a sport corridor so that people would always come back to the inside of the city. And if you look at around the neighborhoods and so on that are around there, it's vitally important that some folks can both work and walk to those facilities. And so I defend the fact that that has been a priority and that it was a very good priority. And as if we look in the future, say, for example, to another pool and so on, that is the ideal location for that. We always must be strong from the middle. If you look at other cities who have developed facilities outside or on the edge, they're all reviewing that right now and saying, well, I need to bring those inside. So I think that's really, really important at how we make sure that we look at that. Now, I appreciate very much that we have looked at the federal and hopefully the provincial government, that in fact there's some dollars for this. But that's not the history of Regina. The history of Regina is we've had service clubs and groups of people that got together and said, we'll do some work, we'll canvass, literally door to door, getting funds so that we can initiate some of those things. So the opportunity for partnership, because now we have some money, or will have some money, is really important as to not only federal money, which would be really nice and has been very short, provincial money, I can't remember the last time other than the stadium, but also that we make use of the other people within our community who want to step up. And I'd be really surprised if some of the current landowners and developers wouldn't also see this as a value because, in fact, we have money. So this is a really, really good thing for us. I realize clearly that it goes to the budget process, but honestly, I'll be standing up with two hands on this one. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor O'Donnell. Other speakers to the motion? Councillor O'Donnell, want to take the chair, please?
Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I rise in support of this, and I want to thank Councillor Hawkins for holding the pen, as you said, on this. It's a really important piece, and my comments will be maybe slightly different than others. You know, over the past couple of councils, we've spun off a lot of master plans. Water, wastewater, transit, all these plans we have been spinning out, and we've been, in one way or another, financing them and putting money together. We now have the REC master plan, which we've just approved, and that lists the priorities that we have as a community. And I'd ask Council to keep in mind the big vision within the master plan that talks about, you know, Lawson Aquatic Center being the #1 issue to come up. Maybe others that come up too, and if we have other orders of government that say, I'll help you do something different than this, that's fine too. But let's keep the master plan together. We approved it unanimously by this council. Doesn't mean we can't do other things, so that's quite important. You know, we have tried the last year to invest even more so in recreation facilities, and we didn't get very far. And we'll see what happens with the new government. We'll see if that's a sign that we can provide more support for this. But what this does mean, and I want to talk about what Councillor O'Donnell just mentioned about community partnerships. Libel Field is a great example of working with community groups to football and soccer together in a state-of-the-art facility. And they understood, Football Regina and Soccer Regina understood how to do this, how to approach us, and it was really important to do that. So there are many mechanisms for us to go forward on this one, but last point I'll make is this is part of the budget process, and that's good. But I support the intent of putting money aside, 0.5%, 1.25 million the first year, 2.550, et cetera, compounding year after year after year. The sunset's important, but it sends a very direct message to residents of the area. We are serious about improving our recreation facilities, investing in them, improving our quality of life. We have so many projects. We could sit here all night and talk about what's so really, really important. But the key to this one is following the master plan. A lot of analysis was done to ensure that was done properly, a lot of canvassing of the community, what they felt the priorities were, and pleased that we're now getting resources together to do this and be able to be available when there is infrastructure money from the federal government and the province going forward on these kind of projects. So I fully support this and look forward to a discussion at budget time.
Thank you.
Other speakers on the motion? Councillor Hawkins, you want to close debate? Call the question on the report. All those in favor? Those opposed? Carried unanimously. Next motion is Councillor Flegel on the old Mosaic Stadium site. Councillor Flegel.
Yep. Where are we here? Thank you. I rise to speak about this because
Do you want to say what it's about, and we'll give a second?
Oh, sorry. I just want to, I lost it here. There it is. I was looking for a detailed report on MN 19-17, and it's to report back in the Q4 of 2019. The detailed cost options, implications, construction timelines, and potential revenue that could be generated by restoring the old Mosaic Stadium site into an interim parking lot.
Seconder for that, please. Seconder, Councilor Shannon.
Thanks. Basically, we've had some stalling of economics, so I've thought that this was an opportunity when I listen to people that are coming from out of town and they got nowhere to park and they're not apt at using the buses. They're the ones that are trying to park in Cathedral, Pioneer Village, North Central, and jamming everything in there, causing grief for the residents. Yes, maybe it's a football game. It could be farm show, exhibition, concerts, Grey Cups. It's not just a football game. So anytime that the parking lot is over full, and with some of the things that go on with the Rider game, it's not accessible to get in there, so they need to go to the externals, and they bog down at least the 3 residential areas that I mentioned. We have 5 to 10 acres of land sitting there vacant, fenced, flat, packed. Half of it's full of crusher dust because there was turf on it. And we had buildings in there without basements, so there was no 30, 40-foot caverns of holes, et cetera, et cetera. So I've had a couple of people go out and take a quick look at it, and they're going to come back with some figures for me, but preliminary figures they've given me, but they said within 4 days, one of the companies said within 4 days they could have it weeded, flattened, and ready for parking. When I look at what we do in terms of agribition, and we use Rambler Park as an overflow for all the trailers, we didn't do a bunch of work. We just let them park on the grounds, and the trailers didn't sink. They didn't fall through to 25 feet. When you look at Country Thunder out at Craven, there's 23,000 people that park on a farmer's field. There's no big deal about that. They just go drive out there and park. We could set up a probable situation for these people to park there. It's already fenced, as I said. We have 1 or 2 commissionaires or somebody, security, directing parking traffic to park there and collect a small fee, $5 or $10. And so I'll leave it at that for right now, but that's sort of the gist. And then I'd like to have administration kind of give us a comment on what they've gotten findings so far.
I'll ask the administration to do that right now. Administration. Mr. Lacey?
Through you, Your Worship, I'll maybe touch on a couple of points here with respect to the motion before you. So one of the pieces, I guess, that we had asked respectfully with respect to the return date of Q4 would be to adjust that to Q2 of 2020 with our commitment that we'd return sooner if we can. And that's for a number of reasons here. The potential costs that we have heard to restore that site to a temporary parking solution have varied quite widely. As has been mentioned here, there's been cost estimates of $30,000 to $50,000. Some of the reach out that we've done at a high level with some of the engineering companies that we've worked for, we've gotten prices $1.5 million or higher. So I think it's really important for us to have a high degree of confidence and ensure we're giving council the right information and our best information with respect to what that estimated cost might be. What are some of the cost drivers behind it? And if you're willing to make certain decisions. For example, I think one of the things that we would need to work through here is city planning standards with respect to interim parking and what they would be and what flexibility would there and how, for example, that impacts pricing. With respect to the old Mosaic Stadium, when it was decommissioned, it was basically decommissioned to be pedestrian walkable. And so there was not a lot of additional work done on it. So part of the assumption here is there would need to be some compaction as well as material, as an example, that would need to be brought in. So, we believe that to ensure council has the best information in front of it and we can provide you the best advice with respect to potential options with respect to this site, we need to go out and seek some expertise around this piece. So that would require us to go out and contract that, allow a company like an engineering firm to work through that for us, and then for us to take that information and bring a report back to council. So that is one of the reasons, there is a wide range here, and I think we need to do more work to give council better information around that piece, and that we take the necessary time to make sure we're giving you that information. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lacey. So you're asking for second quarter of 2020 to get
Quarter 2 of 2020, and then we'd make an endeavor and commitment. If we can get that work done earlier, we would certainly bring it back sooner.
Councilor Flego, are you okay with that? So we'll make that change. That's good. We do have other speakers now. Councilor Murray, you're next.
Thanks. Councilor Flego, thanks for bringing this forward. First thing I think of is what Tim Reed talked to us the other day about limiting the number of vehicles going in. At the same time, I absolutely understand the parking effects in North Central, Cathedral, McNabb. So what I'm wondering is if when administration is undertaking this work, if you'd also be able to engage the North Central Community Association and the other community associations surrounding it, but moreover the RD bid and the warehouse bid, they've come to rely heavily on the amount of transit that comes in and out of their business improvement districts, and it helps economically both of them. So I want to know if it would be negatively impacting them if we increase the amount of vehicles that go to the stadium. There could be significant losses. So if that could be something you look at too. Thanks.
Mr. Lacey?
Through you, Your Worship, that certainly would be additional work that we can do. A second part of that recommendation does relate to interim parking. So one of the things we have been thinking about, if we engage this third party, do we want to do some work around, for example, traffic impact assessment to get a sense of that, right? So it would be remiss of me not to say to council if we're going out to seek that advice and those type of services. There is a cost to that. And so, we estimate that cost could be in the range of $20,000 to $30,000, depending on what work we're looking for that to occur. But I do come back to, I think this is important work, given the broad range of initial high-level cost estimates that we have. And I think that would be, if council wishes to proceed, money worthwhile spent on that if council wishes that level of information to make its decisions.
That would have to be an amendment to include that, a third option to include them, based on the additional cost?
I didn't necessarily read that as being just you would do that.
Yeah, through you, Your Worship, I think based on this conversation and the second part of the motion is that we would do that work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Murray. Councilor O'Donnell.
Thanks very much. So I understand the logic and I understand the request and I understand kind of what's going on here. But I'm stuck. And I'm stuck on the fact that we have spent an awful lot of time trying to train people to ride transit to the area in the middle. I also heard Mr. Reed the other day say, and we don't have a transit stop there. So for me, it's a little bit more about increasing transit and working toward that whole notion of alternate methods of transport to get to the core of our city. I do note at the Rider games, just simply because that's the entrance I walk, they had to move the bike parking lot. It wasn't big enough, and so it's on a new space. So if the motion before me here was, could we see if we could temporarily transform that spot to recreation, whether it's a skating rink or a ball field or a soccer pitch, if it's crusher dust over there, what would it cost to lay down that? I'm in. But if it's parking, I'm afraid that at this point in time, that's not something I can support.
Thank you, Councilor O'Donnell. Councilor Bresciani.
Thank you, Your Worship. So right now during Rider games, what happens with that site right now? Is there any parking at all, or does people park there or anything like that through you?
Mr. Lacey.
Through you, Worship, I'll probably ask Ms. Dell to expand more on what parking is actually used in that site or in that area currently. Thank you.
Through you, Your Worship. The site currently is fenced off and is only accessible to pedestrians, so a vehicle could not get in currently during events.
Okay. Do we know about how many cars could fit in this site possibly through you, Mr. Mayor?
Through you, Your Worship, I think the initial estimate we have is about 1,300 vehicles.
1,300 vehicles that could fit on this site?
1,300, that's correct.
Okay. And would it be that the City of Regina would generate the revenue that is collected from parking there Through you.
Mr. Lacy?
Through you, Your Worship, I think we would look at a number of different revenue models if that was the desire of council to proceed with this motion. Currently, some of the parking space in the surrounding area, the Rough Riders manage that. We have an agreement with them that we get 12% of the revenue that they collect. That's obviously one revenue model that we would look at, but we would look at other revenue models associated with this site as well.
Okay, through you. So just to be clear, we wouldn't have to go, it could be our own entity that we would do. We wouldn't have to contract with the riders. We could, this could be something where we collect the full amount.
Through you, Your Worship, that we would certainly explore all options, including not partnering.
Okay, thank you. So in the motion that Councillor Flegel brought, it says interim parking. What is the time that we think that there is going to be development on this site? Like, how many years are we talking here that this lot could sit vacant? Through you?
Mr. Lacy, do you have a crystal ball on that?
Through you, Your Worship, I think that description fits. I think we know that the property development has slowed down in the city from where it was 5 or 7 years ago. I think it's very difficult to say when we'd actually see build out there, but probably in longer time frames that were initially envisioned.
I'm sorry, how long was that?
Sorry, I don't have a specific date for you. Just given the slowdown that we've seen in development activity, I think it's fair to say that the time frames will be longer than what was initially envisioned.
Okay, so we're not sure. Okay, so the other comment I want to make is the fact that if we just did something in the interim, throwing that old asphalt on there that's already reclaimed, like would that be something that's going to be that expensive if we were to do that? Through you?
I think it's what they're going to try and find out. Mr. Lacy?
Through you, Your Worship, I think that's exactly what we need to find out. And as I've mentioned, we have had much higher estimates, and so I think we need the work done to understand the science behind that so that we can bring something to council that's more complete information upon which to make that decision.
So I guess the last point, that even if it's crusher dust, something like that, that maybe maybe there would be an opportunity to turn it into a skating rink in the winter. Like summer it's parking and winter it's something like that. Is that something that administration could look at as well?
Mr. Lacy?
Through you, Your Worship. So I think coming in here, the focus was on looking at that being an interim parking site. If there is a desire for us to look at broader options with respect to other uses other than parking, that would be certainly, if council wished us to do that, something that we could investigate as far as additional options other than temporary parking.
Okay. So one of the other comments I'd like to make is we should also engage Evraz on this. Will there be discussions with them as well to talk about how they feel about this? Through you?
Lacy?
Through you, Your Worship, that would be part of the consultation process, and imagine we'd also be talking to the riders as well.
Okay. I'll just make a comment that I think that although the transit is good, and I know they've worked really hard to get a lot of people on transit, I think those people are still going to be there because they don't want to drink and drive. So I think there's still that option. But there's many people that still want to take a car for elderly people who maybe don't fit the bill, that have a disability, so they actually need to get closer to the stadium, but they just can't walk so far that they have to. The bus is harder for people, and that's who I've heard from is some people with disability, there's only so many parking spots, but then the other one is elderly people, and they would like to be able to park closer with family members. But right now that's really tough to do within the current stadium. So I would like that to be kind of the research when we're asking those questions. I'm sure the stadium and Evraz has heard some of those comments.
Mr. Holden?
Through your worship, I just want to again, caution council. The transportation and parking strategy that was developed with the stadium. A lot of consultation went into the development of that plan, engagement with neighboring community associations. And while I appreciate the fact that people will reach out and talk about challenges in terms of parking, there's actually no better way to get to the door of the stadium any closer than what our transit service will allow. I think it's also important that as we explore what the options are in terms of how a parking lot, temporary, would impact that plan and some of the relationships and commitments that we have with others that have designed parking strategies. So, you know, whether it's the riders, whether it's Real, they're managing their parking spaces and they're using that as a revenue source. And if the city all of a sudden adds 1,300 additional car spots at whatever the fee is, we have to be careful that we're not creating competition as a municipality with those areas, realizing that we're trying to come up with an efficient system where people are able to access parking. We do have to be careful. And as Mr. Lacey has indicated, there are development standards and construction specifications that we need to make sure we meet as a municipality. So part of putting a temporary parking lot in place may require council to make some exceptions, which then can open up the door to others saying, well, if you're willing to make the exception for yourself, then why don't you make the exception for me? We're not a farmer's field in Craven. We've got a space within the city limits, and we have to be respectful of what it would take to turn that into temporary parking lot. And there may be some options, but that's the work that we need to go away and do. And as Mr. Lacey has indicated, we're probably going to spend upwards of $25,000 to bring you that information. And, you know, I respect the fact that you've talked to some folks in the landscape industry that say anywhere from, you know, 20 to 50,000. We have engineering staff that have looked at it. We've consulted with external engineers that we contract for other projects, and that number of $1 million to $1.5 million in terms of making sure that it is compacted, because there's lots of space there where there really wasn't any development. So when we demolished, we simply fenced it, made sure that pedestrians could access it, the shortcut, but it is not compacted and really ready to just have aggregate put on top of it so it can form temporary parking. So I just want council to realize we can go away and do the work, but it is going to have a cost so that we can bring you that report in Q2 of 2020.
So just one last question, just to clear. I agree the fact that you said that there's the competition within the riders or Evraz who worked on this parking strategy, but I think we also have to think about the residents who are also paying their .45 for the stadium, that not everybody is able to get on the bus. And I'll talk about people who are elderly. The bus sometimes just doesn't work for those people who can wait an hour in line if you can't get there quick enough. But the second piece I have...
30 seconds left on your 5 minutes.
Okay. Did you say that 25,000, this report that you're going to do is going to cost us $25,000? Through you?
Mr. Lacey?
Worship, that would be our estimate, yes.
And can I get a breakdown of how do you come up, how does 25,000, what is that for? City staff is doing the work?
Through you, Your Worship, I
Lacey,
might just, through you, Your Worship, I'll maybe just make a few comments and then ask Ms. Dahl whether she has anything additional. So I think this is just basically, we do seek engineering services for things like the rail yard renewal site, and so we do have interactions with engineering firms. So I think this is based on our experience and discussion with them about what would something like this cost. But I will ask Ms. Dahl if she has anything to add.
Ms. Dahl?
Through your worship, so things that we're expecting that we're going to have to pay for are things like geotechnical studies. We don't know for sure, but a geotech to see what the base is actually like. Topographical survey, also pre-design, and possibly a TIA. So taking into consideration all that engineering work, a TIA is a traffic impact assessment.
What, 20 seconds left.
Thank you. I think city manager has something to say.
City manager?
Through your worship. This gets into how we prioritize our work as administration. So we're working on the rail yards and we're working on that plan. We have $33 million in investment that has come from the feds, the province, and yourselves. So the staff that are working on the rail yard proposal and that work, they won't be available to do this work. So that's why we have to go external and hire an external engineering consultant. So it won't be done by city staff because the resources that we have available are already assigned to work on the rail yard site. So that's why there's an additional cost, which we would have to go external for.
Thank you.
Councillor Bryce, you're next.
Thank you. I thought we did have a parking study and traffic study, which was mentioned by the city manager, so that was sort of my line of questioning. How much did we spend for that study? Through you, Mr. Mayor?
Skill testing question.
Give or take?
Mr. Holden.
Yeah, through your worship, I mean, we don't have that information available here tonight, but depending on the scope of the project, I mean, those types of studies are usually, anywhere from 25 to 50,000, depending on the extent of the site and what you're looking to, get the consultant to provide you with.
Thank you. We did do all the public consultation. We did talk to the community. We did do the traffic studies. We did come up with a plan that seems to work well. I don't think having somebody park at the old Mosaic Stadium who's seniors and have a hard time getting to and from, that's going to be helpful in that situation because that's a long way to walk. So I think that's not going to solve all of that problem either. My issue is the cost of it. The investment that we put into having the traffic study done already and the transit and the way it flows, I think that was appropriate. We talked to the community. We gave them what the plan was. It wasn't smooth sailing, but we did get community buy-in for it, so that's appropriate as well. Sometimes interim changes into 20 years from now because there's no development that may happen right away with something like that. So it could be a parking lot for 20 years. So sometimes interim is a long term. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Bryce. Councillor Stevens.
Great, thank you. So my first impression of the motion is I love identifying an underutilized piece of land and finding a short-term use for it. I love the idea of revenue generation. I also represent a series of communities that have lots of permanent temporary parking spots. Namarand has come forward, others. So I'm going to ask this of administration. If this was a private developer, private land, and they came forward and wanted to do this very project, how would we respond through the underutilized land study, and how would we respond through the official community plan?
Ms. Harlock.
Through your worship, we would definitely look at the proposal and why they're asking for it. We have given temporary parking lots in the past, and it's on a very specialized reasons why we would do that. Okay. But we would have to take into consideration all of those plans and the requirements around why the request is being made.
Perfect, thank you. Do we have any, through the chair, do we have any protocol for dealing with temporary recreation space as an example? So Councillor O'Donnell actually raised a good point. If we're talking temporary, how would we approach that through an OCP lens, through underutilized land, if it's a skating rink, whatever?
Ms. Harlock?
We would do it in the same way that we would the other use. We would look at it, determine whether or not the current zoning could allow for that, and then we might enter into certain agreements or limited development timelines in order to make that use viable on that site for a short period of time or for a temporary time.
Thank you. Through the chair, does administration have any plans, short-term plans for the use of that site beyond the long-term vision of that space? So for instance, are we imagining a small park development, skating rinks, etc.?
Mr. Lacey?
Through you, your worship, so we don't have any current plans. Our focus has been on the rail yard site is where our focus has been.
I might propose an amendment, a third point. basically a copy of the first, which is the detailed cost, options, and implications, construction timeline associated with an interim recreational space.
I think I might rule that out of order. We're looking at a parking lot.
Okay.
If this is defeated, or you want to bring a motion for later on, Councillor Stevens, I just think it's off the track.
Okay, fair enough.
But I understand the intent that you have. Councillor Young?
Thank you, Your Worship. Actually, Mr. Holden made a lot of the points I was going to make on cost, on damage to the busing program, possible damage. I would add to that this is a temporary development place that could be 20 years. And so if we want to look at something else for that area and not go against our policy of not having parking lots downtown so that people use other forms of transportation, I would say later a different motion to look at how we might develop that for recreation purposes, and both Councillor O'Donnell and Councillor Stevens have mentioned that. The other thing is that there's going to be development in the future also at Everest Place, as well as on the old Mosaic lands. So I think we have to stop thinking about cars and thinking about other ways that people have transportation to get to places where they need to go. And I would like to see that area used for recreation purposes. I think there'd be a lot of things that could be there. So I would be willing to look at that down the road. And then the distance for walk, Saturday night when we came out of the stadium, it was very well organized for buses and limos and all of those cars. If you had a car parked in that parking lot, you would have to wait quite some time before everything cleared out so you could come and pick up the person who needed picking up. Does paratransit go to the stadium when scheduled to do that?
It does, yes.
Okay.
It does.
And there are taxis that also can take people who are wheelchair bound, and the stadium's set up for wheelchair people. So there are other ways that they can do that. So for all those reasons, I would not vote for this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Young. Other speakers? Do you want to close debate, Councillor Feigl? 3 minutes on the closing debate.
Sure. Thanks. I guess a couple of things, and I heard it mentioned a few times, is that an interim parking lot is, in my world, an interim parking lot is better than a vacant lot doing nothing there, sitting there being empty, looking like heck, and it's just not doing its job. We are eventually, and I don't want to see us build a recreational facility there, because we had kind of gone out and told the people in that neighborhood it's going to be affordable housing. And I still want affordable housing right on that same spot. And if we go away from that, at least a block or so from 10th Avenue to going a block south, that's what we want to put in for housing. So if we start building recreational facilities on that spot, the neighborhood is just going to go up in arms. And, the other thing is, the best year we had for public transit to the Rider games was 9,000 people per game, roughly. I think is the number we're sort of running at. 30,000 people go to the game. That's 21,000 people that go to the game in other modes of transportation. Now, maybe there's 2, 3 to a car. Out-of-towners will probably come 2, 3. Where do the out-of-town people park? They're not going to park in the Everest spot for $30. Because I've driven in that side of the parking lot and it's empty because it's $30 and it's for some of the other club people. So when you look at that, if you have 8,000 vehicles that have to park around Taylor Field to accommodate that 21,000 people that don't take the bus, where are they parking? In everybody's backyard, in Cathedral, North Central, McNabb, Pioneer Village, everywhere. Exhibition, no different. Agribition, no different. Farm show, no different. Exhibition is even worse because it takes up the whole parking lot. Agribition and the farm show, you can't get a parking spot on that site. So you got 112,000 people going to exhibition. Where are they parking? There's no buses? There's no buses available. So this would be a good spot, and if it's interim, let it be interim. It's a good use of land that we can do a service to the people that want to come to Evraz and look after things. And it generates a bit of revenue. If Mr. Lacey is correct, it's $13,000 an event. We'll pay for that 25 grand in 2 events, if that's what he's saying. But what I would suggest is if we want to look at a temporary, take away a chunk of that parking and put a skating rink there for the North Central kids. I'd go with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Flake. You've closed debate, so I'm going to call the question of those in favor of the motion. Those opposed? It's defeated. Okay. We will move on to our last motion tonight. I'm not sure who wants to bring this forward. There's Councillors Hawkins, Stevens, and Massanelli on single-use plastic. Councillor Hawkins, you want to start off?
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I'll bring the motion forward. The motion reads, it resolved that the administration bring forward a bylaw and associated report for consideration in Q1 2020 that includes regulations that bans the use of single-use plastic shopping bags for the purpose of carrying out purchases from commercial establishments, including takeout and delivery of food within the city. It contains exemptions for transporting such items as bulk, perishable, and frozen goods, includes enforcement mechanisms such as fines for dealing with infractions, public engagement and consultation whereby the public and interested stakeholders are consulted on relevant content of the bylaw. Consideration is given to best practices in other jurisdictions, and pending adoption of the bylaw, a public education campaign is to be undertaken prior to the bylaw coming into force. If I get a seconder, I'll just make a few points.
Just get a seconder for that. Councillor Stevens, okay.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I have been swamped by members of the public since this came up a few months back, indicating that they support it. They indicate that they feel it's a worthy motion, that they are anxious to see the city take action on its commitment to the environment. In Canada, over 15 billion plastic shopping bags are thrown out each year. They fill our landfills, they litter our streets, they clog our waterways. Also, there are readily available alternatives in plastic bags and in reusable bags. Other jurisdictions are moving in this direction, including the provinces of Newfoundland and Labrador, Prince Edward Island, before the legislation in Nova Scotia. British Columbia has taken some steps. There's many steps both internationally and in the United States, and I've listed in the motion some of those areas. Since bringing this forward, some things have happened. One is the federal government has shown interest. One is that the city itself, as part of its environmental efforts, is doing a survey that includes the public's reaction to single-use plastic bags. I believe that survey will reflect the kinds of things that I'm hearing. What I would like to do, Mr. Chair, if it's convenient for you, is I would like to leave those points that I've made on the floor. Through you, I would like to invite my fellow councillors to express their opinion, and then following everybody having a chance to express their opinion, I'd move that a deferral motion be made to the administration. The administration is bringing back a report in Q1 2020. No time will be lost by doing this. This was only scheduled to take into effect in January 1, 2021. So that might be a way of solving these threads, which are all coming together, which is important, and reinforcing them in a positive outcome.
That's a wise move. Councillor Hawkins, are there other speakers to the motion? There will be a referral motion to review being done by the administration already. We're all in agreement with that. So I want to ask you to move that referral motion then.
Your Worship, I believe this is a very worthy cause, and I move the referral motion to the administration.
Do you have a second for your referral motion? Okay, Councillor Murray. It is a referral motion and there is no debate, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. We have two notices of motion. The first one is by Councilors Bresciani and Councilor Stevens. If you want to just read the motion itself, not the preamble. Councilor Bresciani?
Sure.
The resolution section?
Yeah, I'm just going to just find it here. There's it. Yeah, I have it right there. That's right there. That's it. That's all. Oh, good. Yeah, good. Okay, whereas, or therefore, be it resolved that administration prepare a report for executive committee in Q1 of 2020 on the following. Number one, the process for expanding the membership on the Board of Police Commissioners by 2 citizen members, resulting in a total membership of 7. Number two, a comparison with other major Western Canadian cities respecting A, the ratio of citizen members to elected members on boards of police commissioners, and B, criteria that aligns with the City Council's policy statement respecting strengthening eligibility and diversity requirements which represents our community.
Thank you, Councilor Bresciani. Next one is several councilors again. I believe Councilor Stevens, this is you hold the pen, so again, just the resolution section.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Through the Chair, therefore be it resolved that administration return to the Priorities and Planning Committee in Q4 of 2020 with a Community Safety and Wellbeing Report which identifies the roles and responsibilities of all 3 levels of government, identifies ways in which the City of Regina can take a leadership role and make a community safer, identifies the role of harm reduction, anti-gang, anti-poverty, employment, and other strategies in addressing the underlying causes of crime in our communities, explores opportunities to partner with policing, crime, and harm reduction experts, community-based organizations, community associations, identifies the value of and potential terms of reference for a Community Safety and Wellbeing Advisory Committee, includes a framework for information sharing and collaboration between community groups and associations, the Regina Police Service, and the City of Regina, and 7, that identifies potential short and long-term action items.
Thank you, Councilor Stevens. You may as well stay on your feet because you have 2 bylaws to go forward.
Wonderful.
Floor
Thank you.
is yours.
I moved, seconded by Councillor Bryce, that bylaws 2019-7 and -54 be introduced and read a first time.
So these are the Cook residence as a municipal heritage property, and then the exemption for the municipal boundaries for the 3 properties we saw earlier on. I'll call the question on first reading. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried.
I move, seconded by Councillor Young, that bylaws 2019-7 and 54 be read a second time.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried.
I move, seconded by Councillor O'Donnell, that Council hereby consents to bylaws 2019-7 and 54 going to a 3rd reading at this meeting.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried unanimously.
I move, seconded by Councillor Murray, that bylaws 2019-7 and 54 be read a 3rd time.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Last order of business is to move adjournment. Councillor Bryce, seconder. Councillor Murray, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Good night, everyone.